Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am your host. I am glad that you're with me. Let me fix my tie. I want to get that straight for camera. There we are. Yeah, I'm glad that you guys can join me. We are heading into the end of the new year, and I am glad that you're with me as we go into that new great beyond that dimension of potential that is the future that we are going into. And despite the trials, tribulations, the difficulties, and everything below and in between, we are here together nonetheless. And we keep it moving, despite the difficulties associated with living in this modern world. Look, my name, as I said, Jamal Thomas. If you guys enjoy this content, give it a like, share it, subscribe to the channel. My objective, even though I don't know if I'm going to make that objective, still being confident nonetheless, is to reach that 40K by the end of the year. So definitely share the content, share it to your mama, your uncle, anybody who you think may be interested in listening to this voice, give you news, domestic and international, giving it to you straight. I try to be an honest actor. Whether you agree with me or disagree with me, I try to give you my context, basically my framework for coming to a particular decision, and how I reached that particular decision. So definitely share it, like it, subscribe to it. Also, if you really dig this content, please consider giving to the channel. Even $1 helps. You guys make this content capable of being and coming out every morning, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. A lot of news, and unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get to all of it. In fact, I was doing shows over the weekend because there's no way I can get to all of it. So there are a few things. Jimmy Carter has died. Jimmy Carter has died. A good man has passed. And I don't necessarily get to say that often about the people who drop dead, but for Jimmy Carter, I will say that he was a good man, despite his foibles, his follies, despite his failures as a president. At the end of his life, after the term of president, he didn't go out like Obama to get millions of dollars and glad hand and everything else. He went out building houses. He went out fighting to end the apartheid state of Israel, or at the very least in the apartheid that Israel is promoting. And even beyond that, even going to pointing to things like AIPAC as being somewhat of a problem because people can't be honest about their own political takes in regards to Israel because they're going to be primary. He has been an advocate on that issue and has been somewhat of a straight shooter on that issue in a way that has no synonym into our current modern political discourse. Carter, and just to show one point for Carter, he was in an interview, I believe this was with Piers Morgan. And he said this.
The Palestinians, yes.
You obviously were very successful in bringing peace with Israel and Egypt. Can any deal be done that doesn't involve sitting across a table with Hamas?
I've met several times with Hamas leadership, and I think they are willing to accept Israel to exist peacefully within the 67 borders or some modification of those borders. But the first step has to be to bring Hamas and Fatah together so they can have another honest election. That is a major premise, and I think the 67 borders between the two with some modifications will lead to a two-state solution. Netanyahu.
Just to interrupt for one moment, notice what he said, that bringing together Fatah and Hamas is one of the things that are necessary for a two-state solution, meaning for them to push forward in regards to political unity. I want to point out for a moment that part of the reason that Israel funded Hamas, because yes, Israel funded Hamas, was in order to create that division and create that separation, basically to make the face of the opposition to Israel to be Hamas, to terrify the hell out of Israelis, to back the Israeli government's stance that there are no negotiations on this notion of a two-state solution. It's not something they believe in. It's not something from their point of view that it's going to happen. So Jimmy Carter is right here that at the very least the Israeli government understood that a unified front was problematic and that presenting a face like Hamas was more damaging to this notion of a two-state solution. Let him keep going. But I just want to point out part of the reason that Israel funded Hamas was to do exactly what Jimmy Carter said, to prevent what Jimmy Carter is talking about here.
Yahoo now, I believe, has decided unequivocally to move to a one-state solution, which every one of his predecessors in the prime ministership have condemned as a disaster for Israel. And I think Israel is now moving toward a disaster for itself and insisting that all the way from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea has to be Israeli controlled. That is a mistake. The word apartheid.
A one-state solution. That's what he's talking about. That Israel goes into a full-blown apartheid state. Not this hybrid stuff, a full-blown apartheid state. How else could you do it? You have Israelis, they want to maintain a Jewish state, whatever that means. And in the context of having a Jewish state, you have what, 2, 3, 4 million Palestinians in that state at the point where you subsume the West Bank and you subsume these elements of Gaza. That's what they're doing. That's what their policy has been. And so when Jimmy Carter is putting out, you need this united front in order to make this work, Israel has politically done any and everything in their power to prevent that from happening. And this notion of pushing forward on that angle of a one-state solution is what Israel has decided to use October 7th as a rationale to go with. They don't have to say it. You can look at what they're doing. The damage to the hospital that recently has taken place is just utterly ghastly. It really is. And I guess tomorrow we're going to get further into it. But Dr. Hussam Abu Safieh, I believe is the last name is pronounced. That doctor put out video after video begging the international community for help. He got none. And not just got none. When Israel destroyed the hospital and dragged everybody out, they made everybody strip, meaning doctors and nurses, people on crutches, strip, and those people were sent to a prison. The doctor himself was brought into an Israeli, I guess, cab of sorts, where they mocked him for not changing his clothes for multiple days, because again, he was doing the work of a doctor in extreme conditions. And on top of mocking him, apparently made him walk out. I mean, I watched the video. They made him walk out towards tanks alone in the rubble, in the wreckage, and apparently whipped him with an extension cord for his opposition. This is Israeli state in action. Yeah, there's that. Other stories. Russia is saying, so the Russian bases apparently may actually stay in Syria. The jihadist government in Syria, and at this point, it is a jihadist government of sorts. Many of the people that are in that government are not even Syrians, and they're going to get citizenship over, of course, Syrians. But more to the point, Jelani has come out and said, I know I said that this was going to be a transitional government, but really, it's going to be a caretaker government. And this may take 4 years for elections. Who knows? Who knows? It may take 4 years. So what started off as, I'm doing this for the people of Syria, and it's going to be a transitional government in order to get people elected who best represent it. We're not doing that now. It's going to take a caretaker government. It may take years for us to figure out what we're going to do in order to make a government in play. So there's also that. Some of the other issues that are bubbling up, a gas war. Gas war. Now, we saw this once before where the Europeans decided they didn't necessarily want to pay for Russian gas, but for whatever reason, they wanted to get it for free. Well, Russia said no, and there were various shocks in Europe, and those shocks continue to this day. If you look at Germany, Germany is being fundamentally deindustrialized. They seem to have this magical point of view that Europe was constructed by Europe itself, and that their garden, as they called it, was apparently impervious to outside forces that allowed this garden to be a garden. They found out, F around to find out? Well, they found out. And so the standard of living of those various places in Europe dropped. Now, Germany had to get gas and had to pay, meaning Europe had to pay 4 to 5 times more to get the same gas. And in other, meaning from America. In other situations, they had to get it from India or, for that matter, Saudi Arabia, which ultimately was just Russian gas. But they had to pay a markup for the Russian gas because they didn't want to come across as if they were getting Russian gas. And I'm saying gas, oil, energy. Let's say it that way. Clearly, this wasn't in their best interest, but this is what they ran with. Secretly, however, they have been getting some. And despite the fact that Russia and Ukraine are at war right now, the gas has been transiting through Ukraine. Now, the gas contracts are up on January 1st. And Ukraine has said, we are not renewing the contracts for the Russian gas. So Russia has said, if you're not going to renew the contracts, you're not going to get any gas. Full stop. Now, this has caused all sorts of consternation in Europe because what they realize is, oh my God, if they're not going to give us the gas, we in Europe are going to suffer for not getting that gas. And it is going to damage our economies at a time where we are least able to handle the shocks from not getting that gas. So Fico from Slovakia has come out and said, look, this is an issue. What the hell are you doing, Europe? This is an issue for us. And Fico has basically said, if you don't give us gas, meaning if you don't allow that transit, you will not get electricity from us when your electricity goes down. So you will also stay in the cold. Ukraine somewhere also realized we are also using that gas, meaning a part of the gas that is transiting to Europe, Europe is paying for Ukraine to get some of that gas. And so they are also now not going to get the energy that was coming from Russia at the beginning of the month. Now, Ukraine came up with this kind of weird mechanism of third party that it's not going to happen in 4 days. It's not going to happen at all, especially since Ukraine is trying to take Russia to court in Stockholm to get energy, or to not pay for energy, but get energy. It's absurd. And of course, Putin has effectively said, quote, you made your bed, now you're going to lie in it. This stops now. So this will come to a head come January 1st. And we're going to hear all sorts of screams and howls out of Europe as a result. Just astonishing. Just utterly and entirely astonishing. There continues to be a war in MAGA heaven over the H1B1 issue. I'm fascinated by this on so many levels. MAGA is taking a pro-worker stance on this, which again, by itself is pretty astonishing. Trump has come out seeming to decide with Elon Musk. He's going with the globalists, as the right wing likes to say. And this has created a massive amount of consternation within the context of MAGA because they're basically saying he abandoned and betrayed what he said he was going to do. This is also fascinating because if you remember, many of the people on the left often say that these people are brain dead and just go with anything Trump goes with. Well, this is obviously not the case, considering they're going after what Trump wants in this case. So again, it's just fascinating. But let me go to my guests. I am joined with the one and only. There we are. If I can get this up. There we are. I'm joined with the one and only Arnaud Develay. He is an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law and participating in defense of former President Saddam Hussein, along with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction regime imposed by Syria while living in Damascus. He is author of Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of American Political Consensus. Arnaud, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. Always a pleasure.
No, man, I really do appreciate it. I want to start on gas wars. I'm fascinated by this story that has come out. So apparently, despite the fact that there's a war going on, gas or oil, I'm just going to say energy, was still transiting from Russia through Ukraine into Europe. Now, I became aware of this story because of Fico. Robert Fico of Slovakia pointed out this is an issue. We get much of our energy from Russia through that pipeline. If you stop that pipeline, you're going to adversely affect us. And the contracts apparently end at the end of the year. So January 1st, apparently Ukraine and Europe will get no more gas through that transit line. I've heard Putin on this basically saying, you made your bed, now you got to lie in it, being a bit exasperated because Ukraine is also simultaneously trying to do a lawsuit basically to get energy without paying for it with the court in Stockholm. Could you go into this for me and kind of explain this to the audience? I was fascinated when I heard this. And what are going to be the consequences of this?
Well, as you say, this is pretty much, par for the course as far as the law of unintended consequences. Suffice it to say that gas has been flowing into Ukraine all throughout the special military operation. And this has been actually the case in many conflicts before. There were materials declassified about a couple of days ago bearing on the United States doing business with Nazi Germany in 1943. So all those contractual issues always over the military situation, no matter what the conflict is. They are, what you might call it, situations where the parties to the conflict are trying not to delve too much into it, but basically it's do as I say, do not do as I do. As far as Europe is concerned, they've been going full on with the sanctions. They've been obeying Washington as far as not having anything to do with Russia. And now those contracts are basically about to expire. There's no sunset provision, into effect. And Moldova, for instance, is about to get their gas supplies turned off on January 1st. And so this is really, something that is nothing new. It has happened before. But again, it all comes down to, you basically get what you asked for. We provided you with cheap supplies of energy to power your economies. And you've allowed yourself, through your own loss of sovereignty, to be told by some other powers to basically act against your own interest and that of your citizens. And so do not come out now and complain about a situation that you are mostly responsible for.
What would be the consequences for this? I mean, when I look at Europe now, it's not the same Europe before this conflict started. I mean, Germany, let's take Germany, for example. They've been deindustrialized. And many of those companies are ending up in America. What's wild about it, I saw a French, I don't know who the guy was, but he was doing this kind of analysis, basically saying we are being screwed, that this increase in the amount of money that we're paying for weapons and dumping into Ukraine is effectively going to weapons. I think he said like 70% or more are coming from the United States. So they're effectively spending billions in euros to America for weapons that are going to Ukraine, which is effectively draining Europe of money in the way this is working out. He also pointed out that many of the companies that are leaving Europe because they can't afford the energy costs are going to America in order to operate. So once again, you have this deindustrialization on top of losing money to Ukraine. And now you have Ukraine, after taking hundreds of billions of dollars from Europe, about to make a choice that is going to damage Europe's economic security, because energy is by definition on some level economic security. I mean, even if you get toilet paper, you have to make it somehow, and it requires energy in that process to make it. All of these things are effectively damaging Europe. It seems that America is cannibalizing Europe. I mean, how do you view it? Do the Europeans not see this? I remember Angela Merkel mentioned this in her book. But what happened? How do they not see what is effectively happening to Europe? Give me your take on that. You pay attention to the stuff.
Well, I guess it all comes down to one word. It's they have the United States have placed through the European Union construct a whole set of vassals who, for ideological reason and also to line up their own pockets. I mean, because make no mistake about it, someone like von der Leyen and all the people sitting on the European Commission do not care about the well-being of their constituencies, as it were. Notwithstanding their talk about creating a federal super state, they only care about lining up their pockets, and so they are American agents essentially. Whether you're talking about the Western commissioners or the former commissioners from the former Eastern Bloc, they were selected, identified, cultivated, going back 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and over time they were incorporated in think tank and security complexes, the Atlantic Council. And so those people are basically, they're American agents. They're not, European patriots, as it were. And to the extent there are movements of, one might say, a protest or a political resistance to this state of affair, we now have von der Leyen, who unveiled the democratic shield. This is the new word now coming out of this newspeak European Commission, which basically claims to want to protect democratic value and people's ability to cast a vote without outside, i.e., Russian interference. And so this setup allows the Commission to intervene in elections of member states and potentially cancel out the election, as we've seen in Romania recently, when not a pro-Russian but a pro-Romania candidate was calculated, Georgescu, that's his name, was calculated to win the election outright with over 60% of the vote. The European Commission's endorsed candidate did not come until merely came as third. And so, considering the NATO juxtaposition over the European Union is the political arm of NATO, essentially. Romania is a key cog in the system, in the setup, because it borders the Black Sea, it borders Ukraine, and it is home to one of the, if not the largest NATO base on NATO's Eastern Front. So this helps us to understand the fundamental nature of Europe, which is more of a anti-Russian construct as opposed to a home state for European, which we were sold as Europe is peace and nationalism is war. It turns out that it's exact opposite now, and owing to the internal contradiction born out of the fiasco that is the Ukraine war, for Europe at least, we're seeing the European Commission as the point mechanism for Euro-Atlantic interest, unleash censorship measures, if not outright dictatorial powers, preventing people to exchange on what's perceived as sensible topics, and if need be, to essentially neutralize potential threats under the form of candidates in some countries whenever an election is being held. And this person is not under their control. They will, and we've seen it in Romania the last few days, in the wake of the Constitutional Court outlandish opinion bearing on why they decided to cancel out the election.
TikTok video.
Basically, they talked about TikTok video, but then there was an investigation that revealed that it was actually the socialists within that country who were using TikTok to create a split. So, but it's okay. No problem.
But they killed the election over that. They literally killed the election over that.
Yes. And so not only that, but they will bring on trumped up charges those candidates, those out of control candidates, to face court proceedings, and in some cases to throw them and their entourage in jail. This is what has been advocated openly, actually, in official documents circulating. In Moldova, it's the same situation. And to the extent, Georgia, for the time being, seems to have weathered the color revolution attempt against its own institutions. You can bet that they will try again. They will try to apply pressure on the new Georgian government. So, in one word, I would say democracy is dead in Europe, and to prevent, the economic consequences of cutting yourself off cheap energy supplies from transforming itself into political upheaval, which would be the worst case scenario, the European Commission, as the long arm of the transatlantic complex, is ready to go full out and denounce anyone calling out for peace with Russia, or calling out for reestablishing Nord Stream 2, or to turn on Nord Stream 1. I mean, there's still one pipeline that does work, if only they were willing to open the spigot, as a Russian agent, essentially, as a disinformation. Mike Pence touched on the issue when he mentioned that going back to 2015, NATO essentially was turned against the citizen of its own member states. Why? Because the idea was that for the 21st century, the NATO ran military industrial complex is basically gearing up to confront full on what it calls in the American, the Pentagon, DOD white papers, Russia and China as revisionist power. Revisionist power in the sense that they are calling into question the preeminence of American hegemony. So in order to create a war economy able to sustain a full-blown, full spectrum and confrontation of those two rivals, peer-to-peer rival, they have anticipated that the populations of those member states would basically disagree with this policy. They would try to preserve the social welfare program and the providence state inherited from World War II. And so this down the road would create an obstacle. So they had to, in order to dismantle those welfare systems and gear the whole economy toward a war economy, they have to start basically stigmatizing anybody or any political force, any party, as a purveyor of disinformation, if not outright pro-Russian, and so in so doing anti-democratic. So they are protecting democracy in spite of ourselves.
Protecting democracy by destroying democracy. So
Right.
is it fair to say democracy is dead in Europe? I mean, because honestly, political upheaval may be the only way out for the Europeans to disagree with this. Like, I know I keep bringing this up. I was in Europe covering the elections in Europe, the parliamentary elections. The public doesn't seem to be fully on board with this, despite the leadership being on board with this. I mean, is public upheaval the only way out of this? I mean, I know that's, people don't necessarily like to hear that, but is it true?
Well, I mean, we always tend to say that revolutions are right to happen when there's no food. So for the time being, the food somehow, there's still food in the fridge. But it's more complicated than that. I mean, it's also the result of engineering, social engineering policies that have been put in place for the last 50, 60 years, not least of which owing to this theory peddled by what was called the French theory proponents, like the Jacques Derrida and Foucault, bearing on structuralism and critical theory. And the idea was to basically eradicate any sense of grounding in those society, and to create a sense of relativism, that basically we have just the construct of the society in which we evolve, as opposed to the culmination of transgenerational processes. Consumerism was and hedonism were promoted also. and the idea of the individual as the be-all and end-all of societal constructs. So in so doing, first you unravel the idea of a nation, then you go after the family, and then basically you go after the individual himself by saying you are not what you see in the mirror, you are potentially something else, and a multiplicity of it. You basically accompany those, because this is basically what's being peddled in mass media in Western Europe, if not in America, at least the last 4 years, because wokeism is the ultimate, the final crystallization of this process. It started with structuralism in the 70s. Critical theory aimed to replace classical Marxism, and we ended up with woke. And we see now the damage that this has done on those societies, and those societies' immunity, defense mechanism to understand what's going on and proceed to address the problem by creating alternate communities. So it's a very complicated process. It has not been happening just yesterday, and it's deeply ingrained. And to the extent we would hope that people will start rejecting what's been imposed onto them, we have to really look deeper and understand the mechanisms that have been put in place for the last 60 years or so.
I would say sovereignty in Europe is dead. And I do see this kind of resistance against it. I mean, even if you look at Germany, for example, or if you look at France and Marine Le Pen's party, these, what they consider to be far right or nationalists, seem to be pushing back more so on this than many other, let's say, elements of those societies. That seems to be where the energy is and pushing back on it. I want to move for a bit to Kursk. So the West is now catching up with my point of view. When Ukraine first invaded Kursk region, I said to myself, okay, this is humiliating for Russia. There's that. I said, 2, all of those people are going to die. Or 3, all of those people are going to be pushed up. It's one or the other. They're going to die or they're going to push up. Putin is not going to negotiate on this notion of Russian territory. For him, the even thought of it as outlandish. And it seems that Western media has caught up with that point of view. So the Associated Press put out this article, and good on them for doing so, because it's one of the first honest articles the Associated Press has put out. Bloodied Ukrainian troops risk losing more hard-won land in Kursk to Russia. And I've highlighted certain quotes in this, and I want to get your take on the article in general. Well, they talk about North Koreans, that's nonsense. But right here, he says, we have hit a hornet's nest. We've stirred up another hotspot, said Stefan Litzvig. This is the 95th Airborne Assault. It says Zelensky has hinted that controlling Kursk will help force Moscow to negotiate to end the war. But 5 Ukrainians and Western officials of Kiev who spoke on condition of anonymity to freely discuss sensitive military matters said that fear gambling on Kursk will weaken the whole 1,000-kilometer front while Ukraine is losing precious ground in the east. And I said to myself, no duh. Just no duh. There's one other point before I get your take on it. Gathering his men, one company commander told them, quote, we're making history. The whole world would know about this because this hasn't been done since World War II. Privately, he was less certain. Quote, it seems crazy, he said. I didn't understand why. And then when you get to this part, it says, by early November, Russia began regaining territory rapidly. Once in awe of what they accomplished, troops' opinions are now shifting as they come to terms with their losses. The company commanders say half of his troops were dead or wounded. Some frontline commanders, the conditions are tough, morale is low, and troops are questioning command decisions, even the very purpose of occupying Kursk. They even point out that the orders that they're getting make no sense because they are given orders that are so far in the rears that the people have lost the territory that Ukraine is moving pieces about. And so this last part I thought was astonishing. I definitely want to get your take on this. It says, eyeing frontline losses in eastern region known as the Donbass, where Russia is closing on crucial supply hub, some soldiers are more vocal about whether Kursk was all has been worth it. Quote, all the military can think about now is that Donbass has simply been sold. This is what a platoon commander said. And he says, at what price? That part stuck with me. Because I think he's making the point that, what was this really for? And you pulled all of these people, the best people from the front lines, in order to come through this incursion that amounted to all of these people dying by the thousands. Give me your take on that article. And that last part, this idea that they sold it. I mean, is he trying to say that this was a propaganda exercise that they were willing to risk all of these lives for? I didn't, that was my take on it, that this was a propaganda exercise and you took your best people from Donbass, put them in Kursk, and in doing so, we've lost the Donbass region faster than we would have lost it if you had not went in this adventure or this escapade in the Kursk region. Give me your take on that.
Well, I think to understand the situation in Kursk, one has to understand the purely informational nature of the war, as far as the Ukrainian side is concerned, anyway. And we've seen it since the start of the hostilities, is that essentially, whether it's the what they call Spider Island or whatever, Ghost of Kiev. I mean,
Snake Island, yeah.
We've seen, Snake Island, yeah.
It's like they're holding on to the thing. Oh, it's like all of these people have died, and then you find out later.
Yes. The fantastic gains of October 2022, October 2022 in Kharkov region. This idea that the Ukrainian army is somehow accomplishing much militarily on the ground in a war. Let's remind our viewer, which is essentially a 21st century version of positional warfare, trench warfare, is par for the course in the narrative for domestic audiences in the US. The idea is to try to, using the media complex, to try to justify paying billions upon billions of dollars to Ukrainian corruption system. So yes, the Kursk excursion in that respect is comparable to the Battle of the Bulge. It's not me saying that, it's McGregor, and I would tend to agree with him. It had more of a purpose of trying to extend support, promote support as the fundamental structural aspect of the war, all alongside the Donbass line was not looking good. So you cannot wage a war like this just based on ratings or based on perceived loss of support in Congress, for instance. But that's what the Ukrainian leadership, and I would say acting on instructions from their NATO sponsor, did. And so what we have now in Kursk is, as you mentioned, the best, most trained and experienced Ukrainian troops were basically taken away from where they were much needed alongside the, let's call it the conventional front line, to create this kind of bubble of reality. I mean, I'm not saying that the idea was not unlike what we saw in Syria, when the initial objective were to, somehow get into the surrounding of Aleppo, if not outright take Aleppo itself. And if, in and of itself, this alone would have been fantastic. And then they were somehow sucked into this spiral of momentum. And so I'm not saying this is not what happened in Kursk, because the idea of basically seizing Kursk nuclear power plant and blackmail Moscow in the context of future negotiation. Unfortunately, they never even got to NPP Kursk. They were at some point bogged down around Sutsa village settlements. And so then the Russian, upon, in the wake of this effect of surprise, the Russian army proceeded to do what it does best, which is to create those cauldrons and methodically grind out at the moment where we're recording this show, I think something like 70 50 to 75,000 people died
Mhm.
since the beginning of the offensive. But militarily, again, it makes no sense, because how would you expect to sustain your gains, territorial gains, to the extent you cross the river and you don't get any supply lines consolidated? So that makes no sense. Sooner or later, those people were going to find themselves isolated, on the front line, and this is what happened. Now, Russia has no incentive to actually finish him off. Excuse me for the pun, because the very symbolical, the very bare core notion that NATO-sponsored Ukrainian proxies actually have invaded old Russian land, because Kursk region would be considered old Russian land, as opposed to the new regions of the Donbass and
Mhm.
Novorossiya, is a pretty edifying argument to make during negotiation, as far as trying to get what you want, which is security for the Russian Federation. That, hey, look, you got your own proxies are on Russian land proper. We're not talking about disputed regions, depending on which perspective you adopt on the self-determination referenda held in the Donbass and Novorossiya. Here we're talking about Russia proper. So they provided Russia all the talking points it needed for the upcoming negotiations, bearing on this need to redesign. Well, I would say redesign. No need to reinvent the wheel. Essentially, the security architecture of Europe should have been implemented by Jim Baker and co. back 30 years ago, instead of pushing NATO eastward. But to make his point even more efficiently, Putin provided a draft treaty in November, December 2021,
Mhm.
which aimed at preventing everything that has happened ever since. That fell on deaf ear, unfortunately, but this is really the core issue again here. It's trying to take Russian Federation concerns into account, because what we hear right now coming from Washington, despite not withstanding Trump's campaign slogans about ending the conflict in 24 hours, is a non-starter.
Yeah.
Sergei Lavrov gave an interview 3-4 days ago where he covered the ground again, and he says he repeated again that whatever we're hearing, it's a non-starter. So we're going to proceed apace until we accomplish our aims, essentially. So this is where we are right now. But Kursk was another one of those informational, trying to capture the mind of domestic support and trying to promote the idea that it's worthy supporting those democratic, loving Ukrainians as they invade another country's territory, essentially.
Yeah, basically, give me more money. Look at all of the work I'm doing.
Yeah.
We can really win
Look,
this thing. Trust
flip
me.
it.
Look at we've just invaded Kursk. Yeah, that didn't work all that well in practice. I often say propaganda fails to reality at some point, and we are at the point where they are losing more manpower and more territory faster than what they were prior. I'm glad you brought up Lavrov, because that was going to be one of the questions I brought up. Lavrov pointed out that, look, anything that we've heard coming out of people in the Trump camp has not necessarily been something we can agree upon, and that we are not changing our red lines or the negotiating structure. We want the Istanbul Agreement plus, meaning plus the new lands that have been added to the Russian Federation. What I think they ultimately want, though, is what you pointed out, a new security architecture of Europe. And I guess what would that security architecture of Europe look like, using Ukraine as a platform or as a basis for that new security architecture? Meaning, what would Russia agree to? And how would they ensure that the agreement is a legitimate agreement? When the Minsk agreements came out, I know the Minsk agreements was not necessarily a security architecture of Europe, but on some level it was, because the idea was Ukraine was going to be somewhat neutral. Those territories are going to remain under the auspices of Ukraine, even though they're going to be somewhat autonomous.
Mhm.
And Angela Merkel comes out and said, we lied about that. a deal that should have ended a conflict was used as a way for allowing Ukraine to build up a massive military on the Russian border. So how does Russia ensure that whatever they come up with as a new security architecture for Europe proper, take into account Russian security interests in a way that is believable and verifiable? I'm curious on your take, because this is the ultimate question, right? Because the reality of it is, Russia's point is, Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO, not now, not in 20 years, full stop. It is against our security interests. And more to the point, we need to have a way for us to verify that whatever deal that we put on paper that is legally binding, and of course, legally binding, I often say there's no such thing as international law because there's nobody to enforce international law. So in this very specific case, how does Russia ensure that whatever is penned on paper, when an agreement is signed, whatever that agreement is, and whatever that new security architecture of Europe is, how do they ensure that it is worth the paper that it's written on? And what does it look like in practice?
Well, in order to answer this question, you need to look back in history as usual. Back in the days of the Soviet Union after World War II, it will interest your viewers that the point from Moscow was not to install communist regime in those countries. The initial aim, and this you need to research it, but was actually to lean on a far right movement, nationalist movement. Unfortunately, they did not find people to play along, so they ended up basically installing, crypto communist, local communist movement and parties to run those countries. But my point is that the idea was to create this. Russia has this notion, what's called the near abroad, right? It knows that owing to its geography, it is not impervious to military aggression from the West. This goes back to the days of Napoleon, and so it needs to create this kind of cordon sanitaire, this somehow assortment of states or state entities which can, push back westward as far as can possibly be done any kind of threat or potential threat from hitting Russia proper. Keeping in mind that two of the most important administrative and political centers of Russia are not very far from Russia's historical western borders.
Mhm.
So this has always been part of the Russian game plan as far as guaranteeing its own security interest. How would this take place in the current situation? Well, to be sure, no need to reinvent the wheel again here. We had Finland. Finland was neutral for about 75 years until last year it joined NATO.
Right, that's what it was.
Yes, adding the alliance an additional 1,500 kilometers alongside the Russian Federation's border, by the way. So that's an additional 1,500 kilometers or miles, or close to 2,000, 1,000 mile, 1,500 kilometers of borders that the Russian armed forces are going to have to protect, essentially. So, but if we look at Ukraine, yes, Ukraine should be completely demilitarized. There should not be any kind of hypersonic installation put on it. There should not be any European peacekeeping, quote unquote, forces stationed by any way, in any stretch, possible. It should be a demilitarized zone, completely demilitarized. Although it has been conceded that if it wants to join the EU, it perfectly can do so. But to the extent, and this was repeatedly said again, people seem to not want to listen in the West. What the Russian leadership is saying is that you cannot promote your security concern at the expense of another country's, or especially a neighbor country's, security.
Right.
And so, to the extent NATO, as you said, was basically, if you look at the guarantor states of the Minsk Accord, two of the most prominent NATO members, who basically came out and said, it was never our intent to, do just that. We played along, did it for time, and allow the Ukrainian proxy army to be assembled until the moment would come where we would, try to use it as a essentially a prying instrument to
Mhm.
destroy Russian sovereignty. So for the time being, Russia's lines are pretty clear. Demilitarization of Ukraine, turning militarily speaking Ukraine into a neutral state, which does not belong to any of the blocs, to the extent we are in the bloc logic here. Entering into international treaties, the new reality in as far as the self-determination of the people of Donbass and Novorossiya, and basically make sure that this is the starting point of the negotiation. It cannot be a question of, as we heard, reevaluate the prospect of having rump Ukraine join NATO 20 years down the road. It has
Right.
to be etched into the treaties. Now, how do you verify this? Well, there's a lot of precedent where we had treaties, which, as Reagan used to say, trust but verified. So, with satellite imagery, we can see, concentration of troops. We can start seeing, what some people are trying to do, attempting to do in order to circumvent some of the main clauses of treaties. But you got to have some kind of legal framework, to at least say, well, hey, you're getting out of your lane here.
Mhm.
So right now we have no legal framework whatsoever. We have a situation which, in thus far as what we hear from Washington, is an option to freeze the conflict and basically lead to what I call essentially a Minsk 3.
Syria.
And the Russians are not going to go for this. I mean, they're not fundamentally untrustworthy people in as far as what they hear from, their partners, quote unquote. But in the wake of what happened the last 30 years, it's understandable that they would be guarded as to trusting the ink on the document and
I
what
guess
it
my
means.
issue is they saw the overthrow of the legally elected government in Ukraine, the Yanukovych government of 2014, as a legal thing. Meaning they took no issue with the fact that they overthrew a European government because they were the ones that were putting money into overthrowing it. And I guess my issue is any kind of legal thing depends upon the people who are making the choice about what's legal and what's not. For example, Gazprom. So Ukraine is trying to take Gazprom to court in Stockholm, Sweden. Everybody and their mama knows what that verdict is going to be, regardless of what they're bringing up as a case. They're going to go for Ukraine because that's the way Europe has gone. That is technically a legal process, and it's a legal process that's going to err on the side of Ukraine, regardless of what the case is. You can say, does Putin hate puppies? The man has a dog, and they would come back. Yes, Putin hates puppies, meaning it doesn't matter what it is. That is a legal framework. That is a legal framework that's taking place in Europe, and that is a legal framework that's coming back with nonsense as a verdict. That's my issue with the legal stuff. I don't believe in international law. I don't think it exists. And if Russia is looking for a legal solution to it, by my accounting of it, if I don't believe in international law, I don't know how a legal accounting of it is going to do anything. I guess my thought is if they see something where NATO's blowing it off, are they going to attack? Like, meaning, is it going to be that much on a walking a tightrope? For example, some of the deals that people have been thinking up have involved this idea of security guarantees from various partners in Europe that they would get involved if anything pops up in regards to conflict. Now, again, look at the way that they function now. Anything could happen that they would take. I mean, you mentioned it yourself: Ghost of Kiev, Snake Island, Russia blew up its own pipeline. Russia attacked its own base that was holding Ukrainian troops because they hated Ukrainian troops that much. This stuff is nonsense, and yet this is the stuff that they put out in the mainstream media and Western leaders run with. No, North Korean troops have been killed by the tens of thousands. I mean, this stuff is nonsense. They haven't shown that one North Korean troop. So I guess that's my concern with any kind of deal. Like, no, I don't want a situation where Russia takes all of Ukraine because the work involved, the deaths that are going to be involved, the level of destruction and everything else. By the same token, I don't see how a deal is feasible. Meaning, I don't know the thing that mends or makes this go away. It seems like, if anything, Russia is stuck in a conflict that is going to be difficult to extricate itself from, even if it comes up with some kind of deal. Ultimately, there's no way to know that Europe is going to stick to the deal. Correct me if I'm wrong, though.
Well, I guess you raised the question of having a credible and worthy partner, someone who, basically will tell the Europeans to tone it down, or less, you're on your own. So that's the whole point about the Trump administration coming in on this particular file, at least.
Mhm.
Whether or not Trump will be able to enjoin the European to assume full responsibility for their own actions, where Washington on its own has either the intent to reorient its foreign policy to a different theater, or to, as far as Trump is concerned, because that's after all the platform on which he was elected, to
That's
be
right.
able to focus on kickstarting U.S. economy and getting people out of the inflation dregs, which, notwithstanding the fact that they're cannibalizing Europe, they have still suffered immensely from all this money that's coming out and all this printing press going crazy. So Trump needs to have free hands to deliver. He has 2 years until the midterm election to come up with the goods.
Mhm.
So it is a priority for him, if he wants to preserve his majority in Congress, both houses of Congress, against the grain of precedent, midterm elections, which usually sees the incumbent party lose the House or one of the two houses, to make sure that he delivers, and that he delivers in a way that the American people can perceive it in their day-to-day lives. Short of that, it will be a failure. So the
Yeah.
only way for him to do this is to extricate himself out of the Ukraine situation, lest he becomes himself no different than Joe Biden, which is the worst thing that could happen to Trump. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But the political imperative of the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration, to deliver on the most pressing issue at home is most likely what will determine whether or not he's willing to
Determined.
then rein in the Europeans, or at least send them, kick him to the curb. Essentially,
Mhm.
you want to pay for this, then you're gonna have to jack up your NATO, the share of NATO expenditure out of your own budgets up to 5%, knowing full well that this is not going to be sustainable over the long run in Europe. So he
If
has
he,
a lot of cards to play, but he has to really be subtle. Keep in mind that to dress up what we know, negotiations are going to be between DC and Moscow, but for the narrative purpose, we need to dress up the process as being a Ukrainian-Russian process. Right now, we have an illegitimate president in the person of Zelensky. Zelensky is politically carbonized. I don't think he'll be able to present himself in front of Ukrainian voters. So we might see people like plucked out, like Arestovich, who is being now doing a lot of podcasts in the US,
yes, he
who's
has.
been saying all the right things since the start of the special military operation. He cut off his ties with Zelensky pretty early on in the game. And then we also have former supreme commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, Zaluzhny, who
Mhm.
is right now waiting in the wings as a Ukrainian ambassador in London.
In the UK.
So
Right.
that's right. So we can expect those two to pretty much battle to become the next president of Ukraine. But if you look at the time it takes logistically to prepare an election, to have a campaign, so that both candidates may share with the public what they intend on doing. Both will say they want to bring the war to an end in an honorable fashion, most likely. We might not be looking at having a Ukrainian president, legally recognized, internationally recognized Ukrainian president, until late spring, early summer, which means that, notwithstanding conversations that will be ongoing behind the scenes, negotiations per se won't begin until most likely next summer. That leaves 6 months for Trump to somehow, I would say, give, I would say, guarantees to the military-industrial complex that it will keep supplying, maybe not at the same level, but keep supplying the Ukrainian proxies with equipment and monies. Again, in what extent this monies will be determined, the amount of monies will be determined, that remains to be seen. But that should be enough of a leverage for him to tell them, look, I'm not just dropping the ball here. I'm giving you what you need. And push comes to shove, the Europeans will pay for it. They will buy our own equipment anyway. I will force them to increase their budgets if they want NATO to survive. And through this ramping up in European military budgets, you'll be able to eat. So this is what he's going to tell them, right?
Yeah.
Then they'll tell him, okay, fine. This arrangement of some sort will allow him to get his way, work his way through summertime, and which time will be time to sit down and come up with a serious framework. We know that, I'm not sure he understands, Trump himself, what Russia intends on accomplishing and gaining. So that will be Kellogg's job to go to Moscow and get probe the Russian leadership and go back and brief Trump on what we're talking about here. Because
Arnaud,
I think yes.
No, please finish. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that will be on the US side of things. On the Russian side of things, they have 6 months to make more gains, essentially, and consolidate and extend their military gains, so that when the time for negotiation comes, they have a lot of cards to play. They can withdraw from some areas, or basically withdraw from some areas. I don't think, like you said, you're right. They don't want to take all of Ukraine. That's not part of the plan, but they want to go as far as possible westward to neutralize the range of the long range missiles. So that would most likely at least include the Dnieper and maybe beyond, bearing on their estimation of what kind of ballistic capabilities the West is able to use in the future. Once there's some kind of consensus on this kind of redrawing of Ukraine, then they'll be able to talk.
Arnaud, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate your insight on this. I really do, and I think my audience did also. Arnaud Develay, he's an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law and participating in the defense of former President Saddam Hussein with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction regime imposed on Syria while living in Damascus. He is author of Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of American Political Consensus. Thank you for this, man. And Happy New Year, by the way.
Happy New Year to you and to all the viewers.
Oh, thank you, man.
See you next year.
See you next year. Have a good one. All right. I would like to bring in my next guest. Oh, before I bring in the next guest, if you guys enjoyed this content, if you dig foreign and domestic policy early in the morning, first thing, Monday through Friday, definitely like this video, share this video, subscribe to this content. If you really dig it, you can support it through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chat or Super Stickers. Either one, all chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. And let me bring in my next guest. We are joined with Hamza Salam. He is a Pakistani journalist. He's founder and editor of Pakistan Daily, and former reporter for Pakistan's The News International. Hamza, you're the guy I wanted to talk to. How you doing, man? You doing all right today?
Yes, I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me, Jamal.
No, man, thank you for joining me. When I hit you up over the weekend, I pointed out that the skirmish, that border skirmishes seem to be heating up in Afghanistan and Pakistan border. And this morning, when I wake up, I see news that certain parts of the Taliban has taken over a checkpoint held by Pakistan right here and are parading around and waving flags in doing so. Now, this is on top of other skirmishes that have been taking place. You got to explain this to me because I don't quite get it. This has happened once before, or maybe many times before. It just hadn't necessarily popped into our political awareness of it. But there seems to be border skirmishes that are heating up where the Taliban has threatened to invade Afghanistan and invade Pakistan. And Pakistan has threatened to bomb with no mercy Afghanistan if the Taliban indeed does so. This doesn't seem minor to me. This seems like this is escalating. What is going on the ground? Give me your take of this.
Well, it's a very complicated situation, and the hostilities started after Pakistan conducted aerial strikes in Afghanistan in the Paktika province on the night of the 25th of December, and they targeted elements of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Now, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is, even in the video in which you showed, these were TTP fighters. They have been historically conducting terrorist actions against Pakistan, against Pakistani security forces, against Pakistani civilians. And this is an ongoing war which started in 2007, and an end is not in sight. Now, what the Pakistanis have seen is that the TTP is using Afghan soil to plan and orchestrate attacks in Pakistan. Now, after the fall of Kabul, when the Afghan Taliban took over, it was expected in many Islamabad quarters that the TTP would be reined in. And these unprovoked attacks, these terrorist attacks would stop. And you're right, at that time, maybe it made sense, but time has proven that, this was not the right strategy to have. Now, what we've seen is that hostility, not just from the TTP, but also from the Afghan Taliban has increased, as we have seen in these skirmishes. Now, in these skirmishes, particularly in the Kursk district, we have evidence, our newsroom has evidence, that TTP fighters are actively cooperating with Afghan Taliban fighters. And these are joint operations which are taking place, even though as of today, the skirmishes have paused, diplomatic channels have been used. Pakistan sent a special representative to Afghanistan. His name is Mohammad Sadiq. He is in Kabul at the moment and is negotiating with the senior Taliban leadership in Kabul. But unfortunately, what Islamabad has witnessed since the fall of Kabul is that the Afghan Taliban has done absolutely nothing to contain the TTP. Now there's a lot of clarity in Pakistani circles. We recently had a press conference by the DG of the Inter-Services Public Relations, Lieutenant General Ahmed Sharif Chaudhry. He said that the status quo is no longer acceptable to Pakistan. And now it seems that Pakistan will take action, whether it has to be taken in Afghanistan or the elements which reside in Pakistan. But no longer will the Pakistani state accept any cross-border terrorism from Afghanistan.
Now, what is the difference between the TTP Taliban versus the proper or Taliban proper? What's the difference between the groups?
Well, the TTP is an offshoot of the Afghan Taliban, and it pays allegiance to the Emir of the Taliban, but it has its own Emir. So Noor Wali Masood heads the TTP, but Noor Wali Masood is also part of Akhundzada's Taliban, which is the Afghan Taliban, which is the ruler of Afghanistan at the moment. But right. The TTP focuses on operations in Pakistan. The TTP's end goal is to make Pakistan an Islamic, or what they call an Islamic state. We don't consider their version of Islam. Like Pakistanis have a very different version of religious law as compared to the terrorists of TTP. So their stated goal is to invoke their version of Sharia law in Pakistan. And the Afghan Taliban, their goal is, or their outlook is dependent and focused particularly on Afghanistan. So that is the main distinguishing factor. But there are many similarities between the groups. There are many fighters who sometimes are part of TTP, then they go to the Afghan Taliban. They cooperate in operations, as we have seen very recently. So even previously preceding the fall of Kabul, these two groups, they worked together against the Americans. So there are some similarities and some differences between these groups, but they are separate entities with separate leaders.
Okay. Is the Taliban proper supporting the TTP and their incursions into Pakistan?
Well, yes. Now I think that the failure to restrict them, to stop their activities, I think proves that yes, they are supporting their efforts. And we've also seen some mid to low level Afghan Taliban commanders claim that the territory of Pakistan starts from Attock, and they're totally disregarding the KP province of Pakistan. They claim that that is their territory. So such rhetoric originating from even a mid-level commander does raise eyebrows. And as Pakistan is a nuclear power, it has a formidable military. And even though the Afghan Taliban have also proven their muscle in after the war on terror, and they face NATO, and now they're ruling Afghanistan, but they do not have an air force. They are not a proper multilateral military. While Pakistan is a nuclear power, and Pakistan has always had an elder brotherly role in regards to Afghanistan. We've tried to support them. We try to help them get international recognition, but it seems that our help or support from Pakistan has been taken for granted. And perhaps the Afghan Taliban feels that the TTP is a greater asset than their relationship with Pakistan, which is why they have been unable to restrict these unprovoked attacks.
But Afghanistan is going to lose their mind on any attacks on Afghanistan, even if those attacks against the TTP Taliban, right? I mean, like, I've been going through this report, and I've been shocked at some of the stuff that has been coming out of the Taliban. Like, in one sense, they pointed out, hey, we took down all of these empires, America included, Pakistan, you better watch out. And I'm saying to myself, why is this happening? Like, for the life of me, I could not understand how this started and why this was taking place and escalating at the speed at which it's escalating. Pakistan is full well threatening military action against Afghanistan. And after this taking of, I guess, this border outposts of Pakistan, what do you think the consequences of them doing that is going to be for the state of Afghanistan?
Well, I think Afghanistan was unable to restrict Pakistan's airstrikes. They do not have advanced radars or air defense systems. So Pakistani jets can literally be in Afghanistan. They can target Afghani targets in 5 minutes. So the capabilities of our air assets is incomparable to Afghanistan. And we have a stronger army. We have more numbers. We have better technology. We have better funding. So as far as our conversations with security sources are concerned, I think there is clarity in Pakistan that the Pakistani military and the Pakistani nation are prepared for any and every eventuality in Afghanistan. We're ready for a full-scale war. We're ready for skirmishes. We're ready for aerial combat, but we are not ready for our security forces or our civilians to be targeted in unprovoked terrorist attacks every single day. This year, 2024, has been extremely bad in terms of terrorist attacks. Hundreds of our soldiers and officers and other personnel have lost their lives. So, Pakistan has exercised a lot of patience. But I think now the patience has run out. And as General Ahmed Sharif Chaudhry said, that the status quo is unacceptable to Pakistan.
Wow. Wow. Just wow. What do you expect to take place with this? Meaning, do you expect further escalation? Do you expect the escalation to include the main body of the Taliban? Meaning, do you take this as, yes, this may be starting with the TTT Taliban, but this is going to spread to the traditional, regular Taliban that we know and that we're more so accustomed to in Afghanistan itself? How do you find this to escalate? I'm just curious on your take on this. You've been following the story, and the story is directly related to issues associated with your country. You would know better than I would. What do you think is going to happen next in this?
Well, I think it is possible that militarily the situation escalates and there are further border skirmishes between Pakistan and Afghanistan. It is also possible that Pakistan conducts aerial strikes against TTP targets in Afghanistan. But it is also possible that diplomacy wins and logic and reason, they are considered the factors which determine the future of these two nations, because right now the situation is extremely volatile and tempers are high on both sides. Since Afghanistan also claims that 70 people, close to 70 people, were killed in Pakistan's aerial strikes. Pakistan claims that a lot of their people have died in terrorist attacks which were planned in Afghanistan, and both of these parties may have some substance. But I truly hope that good diplomacy dominates this discourse.
When's up?
Personally, I've met Afghanistan's foreign minister Amir Khan Muttaqi, who seems like a rational person, and he's lived in Pakistan. He got educated in Balochistan. He speaks Urdu, so when he spoke to me, we could talk in the same language. So Pakistanis and Afghans are essentially not that different. We also have a lot of Pashtuns on this side of the border. We have a lot of Pashtuns on that side of the border. We've hosted millions of their refugees, and they live in Pakistan. They live amongst us like our brothers, and historically there have not been many issues. So I do hope and pray that diplomacy wins, but if not, military outcomes will determine the future.
Is it something that they want short of converting Pakistan? That answer is shocking to me. That what they want is to basically enforce their version and their brand of Sharia law over all of Pakistan. Pakistan is a massive country. That is pretty astonishing that that's what they want to do. They seem to be ignoring the fact that, as you pointed out, Pakistan has nuclear weapons. Pakistan has an air force. Pakistan has a modern military. They seem to be blowing that off. Is there something that they want besides that? Meaning, is there something that they want other than we need to enforce our brand of Sharia law in Pakistan for whatever reason we need to do that? Is it food? Is it medicine? Is it some kind of financial gain to increase their standard of living? There has to be something that they want beyond that.
Well, so far, what we've seen is that the Afghan Taliban has not been that focused on the economic progress of Afghanistan or the social progress of Afghanistan. We've seen that they have created impediments for women to access education or to work, or even recently they passed a law which bans women from working in NGOs or humanitarian organizations. So it does seem that their outlook is regressive, and they're trying to take Afghanistan backwards. So these are not the goals they are trying to see. Even international recognition, I think what Pakistan hoped was that Islamabad could help Kabul fight its case in the international realm and help it gain international recognition. But it seems that there is a very dangerous jihadi mindset amongst the Afghan Taliban leadership, and then their offshoots like the TTP, and even this claim, this absurd claim that they have claim to any territory in Pakistan. Like, this has no historical backing. This has no legal backing. This militarily they cannot do that. Like, if you war game this scenario, I think there is a 99.999% percentile that they will not be able to get even an inch of Pakistani land. But
They
what
just took an
Pakistan,
inch of Pakistani land. I mean, or is that not Pakistani land?
yeah, sometimes some of their fighters don't even accept that, this is Pakistani land. But in order to prevent any hostility, Pakistanis are first, they fenced the entire border, which had not been done. Now 90% plus of the border is fenced. And there's also whispers. It's not official policy yet, but there are whispers that Pakistanis are thinking about creating a buffer zone, maybe 20, 30 kilometers, in order to ensure that there is no infiltration. Because you have to understand that there are some tribes who have half the tribe is in the Pakistani territory and half the tribe is in the Afghanistan's territory.
Interesting. Oh, that's super interesting. So they go back and forth, meaning they're able to travel back and forth without any impediment because they're part of both tribes. That's fascinating. You must understand, we don't have tribes in America. It's not built that way. That's not the way. Like the first time I went to Africa, I think I was in Kenya, Africa proper. And I was curious about what their political climate was. Like, what are the political divisions? Like in America, it could be race, it could be culture, it could be finance, like money, like economic. And one of the main things were tribes. Like everybody's black. So it's not like you have this kind of black-white divide. You might have like 0.001% of the people in the country that might be white. And so it becomes this kind of tribal clashes, these tribal fights that these guys engage in regards to their politics. It's fascinating. I have to ask you before I let you go about Imran Khan. I consider him the coolest man on the planet. That's the way he looks. But he has not necessarily had great political fortunes over the course of the last year. What is the case with him now? From my understanding, they dropped some charges, but they still kept him incarcerated, or correct me if I'm wrong. What's going on with him before I close with you?
Well, I think 2025 will prove to be lucky for Imran Khan. And already we're seeing such extensive and coordinated lobbying from Washington, which has a great impact on Pakistan. You may have seen Richard Grenell's tweets about Imran Khan and calling for his release. And he is particularly close to Donald Trump, and he is his envoy for special operations. And whatever he says is taken very seriously in Islamabad's diplomatic circles. And his statements have coincided with sanctions on Pakistan's ballistic missile program, fresh sanctions. So the Pakistani diaspora, or not diaspora, but the intelligentsia and the intellectual elite is thinking that, perhaps this is a coordinated effort. And these sanctions are also a pressure tactic done to make Pakistan comply to their wishes. And I think that, because of this pressure, already negotiations have begun between the government of Pakistan and Imran Khan's political party. Some rumors suggest that he has been offered a house arrest so he can go to his palatial mansion overlooking the mountains, and he can live like a king essentially, but he will be confined to his home. But Imran Khan has refused. He's asking for the release of other political prisoners. And there's also been some convictions of some people in military courts. So that is also something which is controversial. The US State Department has issued a statement. UK's FCDO and the EU and other nations have condemned these military courts. So, overall, I think that 2025 in Pakistan, it could be a year of political stability. It could be a year in which political forces and other forces, the establishment, they sit together, they conceive solutions, because ultimately these internal conflicts are dividing our attention. And we seek peace, progress, we seek success. We don't seek war or, internal.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, okay. I love the fact that you said what America says has weight in Pakistan, which takes me back to the ambassador, where Imran Khan, on the day that Russia invaded Ukraine, Imran Khan was sitting in Moscow. Now, he wasn't there because of the invasion. He was there for something else. But, from the Washington point of view, especially with the Biden administration, they see that and they say, how dare he? Because anything that's associated with Russia from the U.S. point of view, especially under the Biden administration, was radioactive. And one of the comments that was made effectively to Pakistan by the U.S. ambassador was that Imran Khan is aggressively neutral. I remember that statement because of the way it sounded, aggressively neutral. And they didn't like the fact that he was aggressively neutral. And it seemed that that conversation triggered elements within the context of Pakistan's political system to get rid of Imran Khan. And not just get rid of him, also go to get rid of his party. Now, I don't doubt that there is some element of stress between this notion of the people that Imran Khan may represent. Again, correct me on this if I'm wrong. The people who Imran Khan represent versus the military, and this idea of who holds power in Pakistan. And it seems that the military was trying to assert itself, saying, it's us. We hold the power in Pakistan. Don't get it twisted, in which case Imran Khan gets put in prison. Many of his party get put in prison. His party, in some respects, get outlawed. And, it moves on to today. Is anything that I said wrong? Meaning, is there anything you disagree with? Because you live there. I don't. And so your take on this is going to be more precise than my take at a distance. But how do you see it? I mean, do you see that America did have some level of influence in what happened to Imran Khan? And more to the point, even his political party at this point. Well, give me your take on what I just said about American influence and whether this is a kind of a fight between the public represented by Khan and the military in regards to who holds sway and power in Pakistan.
Well, I find it hard to disagree with a lot of what you said because it is quite accurate. And I would say, unfortunately, Washington has had an overbearing influence on Pakistan. I think the primary reason for this is that Pakistan is a poorer country as compared to the United States. And they have a lot of economic leverage on us. And we are dependent on the IMF, on World Bank financing. And Washington has, in the past and even today, it does use financial coercion as a way to control the politics of Pakistan. But now I think that ever since the recent sanctions on Pakistan's ballistic missile program, I think that there is an understanding in Islamabad that Washington is not the only power center in the world anymore. Now we live in a multipolar world, and Beijing and Brussels and Riyadh and many other, London and many other centers of power are emerging, which can help Pakistan and are helping Pakistan. So I think that yes, there was American interference when Imran Khan was removed from power, and yes, there is American interference to get Imran Khan back into power. So, this is a Ferris wheel which keeps on going, and the people of Pakistan have had enough of this interference. We're a sovereign nation. We seek friendship with the United States, but we are not slaves. We are not even servants. We are a nuclear-powered, proud nation of 250 million people, and we know how to protect our sovereignty, our territorial integrity, and our internal politics and our judicial system. So any interference in our judicial system or our domestic politics from other nations is unwelcome.
Damn right. Damn right. I appreciate that. I am a guy who believes in sovereignty of nations. So I do not blame your take at all. You're absolutely right to have it. Man, thank you for this. Thank you for the explanation. Great run through and great breakdown. I really do appreciate it. Hamza Salam. He is a Pakistani journalist. He is the founder and editor of Pakistan Daily and former reporter for Pakistan's The News International. Have a good New Year, man. I really do appreciate it. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year, Jamal. Thank you.
You have a good one. All right. I want to bring the man of the hour, the man that everybody has been asking for, who is putting on his suit. I'm going to let him get that suit on before I bring him on. We are joined with the one and only Dr. Wilmer Leon.
Good morning.
There we are. There we are. Dr. Wilmer Leon, he's a political scientist, nationally syndicated columnist, and host of what is the name of your show? Because you have more than one now.
Yes.
And then you really need to write this down. What is the name of it?
The podcast is Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon. And the Sirius XM show is Inside the Issues.
And Inside the Issues. Excellent.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, my man. I really appreciate those.
Which we need to, in fact, hopefully I'll have your people talk to my people, and let's see if we can tape it so we can get you on this coming Saturday.
My people are just me. And if you want me, you got me.
Well, there we go. Now my people have talked to your people.
Right. I may be getting a person to help me with some of this stuff just because it's a lot to manage and keep track of. But if you want me, you got me, man. As simple as that.
We'll do it.
I am so happy to have you, especially closing out the year. You are one of my favorite guests to have, and I wanted to have some of my favorite people as I careen out of the year and crash into the new year. The great.
You just need to get out more. That's your only issue.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, if I'm one of your favorite guests, you need to get out more. That's all. But anyway, go ahead.
My hamster on the wheel. News story come out. Got to get to the, where's my mic? Where's my mic? So I sent you a few stories that I wanted to cover, but another story came out that I have to go to because I am utterly and entirely fascinated by this. I call this the Great Delusion, and delusion on a level that is epic, that is mind-blowing, that is on the scale of the universe forming, that mind-blowing. Joe Biden, to the Washington Post, pointed out that he believed he could beat Trump. And not just believe that he could beat Trump, he regrets getting out of the race. Now, that is mind-blowing to me because I want to point to something before we even get to that, before I even get your take on this. Think back to why Joe Biden was summarily kicked out of the race. Think back to when he was summarily kicked out of the race, where he was eaten alive by members of his own party. And when the media was like, hey, we didn't know that he was this bad off. This is Joe Biden at the debate. I'm going to show two of these because both of these things are fantastic. Let's play the first clip.
We have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 billion, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare.
That is why Joe Biden is out the race. That's why Joe Biden is out the race, right? And it wasn't just that. Even when Joe Biden wasn't talking, he was standing there like gap mouth and just staring into the camera like a maniac. And I have more of those clips, by the way. I can play 4 of those. Easy. I explain this level of radical delusion to me where Joe Biden looks at all of this and he says, I believe I could have won and I regret dropping out. And I would point out that this, if nothing else, is one of the clearest points of cognitive decline that Joe Biden has ever exhibited by making that point of view to the Washington Post. Give me your take on that.
The minister, there's a quote of Minister Farrakhan's that I use quite often because it is so apropos. He said this was back in '92 when I think it was not when so now I'm getting like Joe Biden when when George Bush was getting ready to go into Iraq, he said, "Never underestimate the blindness that attends arrogance."
Oh,
He said, "You don't see with your eyes, you see with a combination of your heart and your mind, and that those two things can blind you to the realities that are right before
whew,
you."
preach.
And this is just his ego. You're right. Delusional is the right, I think, descriptor here. That's insanity. For the whipping, for as much as Kamala Harris got whipped, the whipping would have been even worse, because he would not have been able to articulate policy. Kamala didn't have any. He couldn't have articulated the policy that he had. And the other problem that he was going to have was he wouldn't have been able to defend himself against those who would have been on the campaign trail saying, "You promised a number of things in 2020 that you didn't deliver.
That's right.
Why didn't you deliver them?" He would not have been able to withstand that barrage. So that's if I could use, if you don't mind, a political science term.
Please.
Dude's tripping.
Dude's tripping.
Yeah.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. And I love the fact you said the barrage. Because if you notice, during the campaign, Trump had somewhat of a problem in the sense of, okay, Kamala Harris is the VP. He got around that problem by tying Kamala Harris to everything that Joe Biden did. So it became Biden, Harris, and then it just became Harris, as if Harris was still the president of the United States. There was no way Joe Biden could have stood there and defended that when you look at the cognitive decline that Joe Biden had suffered. And, the Wall Street Journal pointed out that this started on day one, meaning his family, his friends, White House insiders, all of them from day one conspired to hide that version of Joe Biden from the American public, changing his scheduling, all of that stuff, in order to ensure that the best version of Joe Biden is the one that was forward-facing. And even that version was being called cognitively challenged. If you remember the Her report, where Democrats are like, "Oh, how dare her say that his mental deficit," and add that into a legal document. And then we saw the debate, and it's like everybody shut up about her because they could see it for themselves. Would somebody call this the biggest cover-up of 2024? Would you accept that? Or do you think there was something bigger? Meaning the biggest story that was untold in 2024. There was a Democrat and a Republican that pointed that out. Give me a take on that. Not to linger, but I am curious on your thoughts.
Well, it's debatable. So that's a matter of opinion. So the biggest story, to me, the bigger story following along that line is not Joe Biden's obvious decline and who was hiding it. The story is who's been running the government. To me, that's the question that nobody really wants to talk about. Tony Blinken, who's been running the government? And it hasn't been Kamala Harris.
Good question.
So to me, that's the bigger story, is that with the obvious decline of the president over the last 3.5 years or so, who has been running the government? And oh, by the by, where has he been the last month? Where was he during this continuing resolution debate? He when Hakeem Jeffries and Mike Johnson made their deal 2 weeks ago, I think, on a Monday, or they shook hands and let's move forward. And then Elon Musk, an unelected individual, scuttles the whole damn thing. And you don't hear a word from Joe Biden saying, "Time out, homeboy." And Donald Trump, president-elect, not president, president-elect scuttles the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Where was Joe Biden? He should have stepped there. There should have been a 12-minute news break. Joe Biden is going to speak to the American people from behind the Resolute desk and let everybody know this is wrong. Joe, where were you? Walking around the Oval Office with his robe, eating a popsicle? No.
Applesauce, my friend. He was eating
Oh.
applesauce.
Okay.
Damn good question. I've asked that question myself. Like, if Joe Biden has been cognitively declining, it's kind of like a president is not doing nothing, right? I mean, you could say you can have President Ham Sandwich, but all things being equal, you want President Ham Sandwich to make a speech every now and then, especially if something is going on. He has been invisible, especially when it became clear. I think he's spiteful. I think he.
Oh, there's no question about that.
Yeah, I think he fully resents the fact that they ate him alive like that, because that is going to be his presidential record. Meaning, when they put Joe Biden's name in, they're going to talk about his cognitive decline in the records, and he knows that. And this is going to destroy his legacy on some level, whatever legacy he believed he had. I agree with you 1,000%.
And quickly, the contrast to that is Ronald Reagan, where his cognitive decline is a footnote, whereas Joe Biden's is going to be a major headline or a major bullet point in the narrative.
Oh, absolutely agree. Especially when they show that debate and they show that clip, or they can show the other clip where Trump is like, "I don't know what he said, and I don't think he knows what he said either."
Right, and he was right.
Yeah, he was right.
He was right.
He was right. Speaking of that, and before I have to get to Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is dead. And I said, a good man has died. Do you disagree with me on that, or you agree with me on that? And the reason why I said that, just everything that he did after he got out of the presidency, especially on the issue of Israel and Palestine, he has been good. And I know in office, he was not that great, even though there's certain things that he said, like that Malay speech to me is fantastic. And that speech could have been read today. But give me your take on Carter. I don't say that to hedge or push in a particular direction. If you disagree with me, feel free to take the piss out of me on it. You will know this better than me. You may even change my mind on it. But give me your take on the Carter thing. Jimmy Carter's dead at 100.
If I can quote a greater mind than mine, a good man has died. Oh, that was you. No, I agree with you, and I think my podcast is called Connecting the Dots. Shameless plug, because I believe that one of the mistakes that a lot of us make is we tend to view things as though they happen in a vacuum, and you can't look at Jimmy Carter's life without understanding the historic context in which he was born into. So, born in Plains, Georgia. So many will say, well, he was a racist. Well, he did, when he ran for the governor of Georgia, he made a political calculation that he couldn't win without entertaining the racist factions in the state. And he did that. But as soon as he won his inaugural address, he called for integration in Georgia. He voted. He refused to join the White Citizens Council. So do you excuse some of the things he did to get into office? No, you can't. But you also can't allow those things to control the entire narrative. He was the first president, I believe, to be born in a hospital.
Really?
Yeah. He was, yes.
Wow. Peanut farmer, first born in a hospital. Wow.
His mother,
how far back it was.
And that's why I say you've got to connect these dots.
Yeah.
He championed women's health care, and he championed health care for Black women because his mother was a nurse. So he was a good man, I believe, in his heart. He went against the grain in his church to include African American members. In fact, he left one church because they refused to allow black congregants.
Wow.
And so he was one of the leaders in the nuclear submarine. I mean, he's a brilliant man. I mean, you don't become a submariner being an idiot.
Right.
So no, I think some of his politics were complicated. I think he, in some regards, was a victim of history. Was he perfect? No. But one of the things that I heard a couple of African American, he was one of the first presidents to appoint I think it was like 17 or 18 individuals of color to his he appointed black judges. First one to, I think, appoint a female as the head of a department of a cabinet member. I mean, he did a lot of very progressive things for a guy who, coming from where he came from at the time that he did, could have very easily reverted back to the same old. And of course, the agreement between Egypt and Israel. There were a number of things that he did that were very progressive. And I think, again, that greater mind than mine, a good man has died.
Yeah, I saw the death. My ex asked me, she was like, why are you taking that position? Like, why do you, because I was like, what? He's 100 years old, but it's still weird for us when a president dies.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
It's this idea that you only get so many of them. Bill Clinton, George Bush, Bush Sr. Is Bush Sr. still around?
No,
I'm not
he's
sure
dead.
if Bush Sr. Okay, so he's dead. So we're talking about effectively George Bush, Bill Clinton, Obama, and Joe Biden.
And right. And until yesterday, Jimmy Carter. Right.
Yeah. The man has died.
Mm-hmm. And what's also, just really quickly on that too, what's also interesting is it might have been Bush Sr. that when he died, again, I'm becoming Joe Biden. Donald Trump did not attend. Donald Trump.
Really?
No, he wasn't there. They don't like him. He's not in the frat. Even though he's in the fraternity, he doesn't get invited to the parties. They don't like him.
By the way, they treated Jimmy Carter the same way when he was alive, by the way. Like, meeting Obama, Clinton, they wouldn't necessarily go to Jimmy Carter. They wouldn't bring him out on any of these events. They acted like he was radioactive. I mean, like, it was shocking the way they dealt with Jimmy Carter. They acted like he was some kind of liability while he was alive, especially when he was active. I mean, the man was 90 years old building houses for the poor.
Right.
Like, think about that. 90 years old.
He was an internet. I remember I used to quote Jimmy Carter often when it came to talking about the elections in Venezuela, because I would say Jimmy Carter told us that those elections were free and fair, and some of the freest and fairest in the world. So I think one of the reasons why they shunned Jimmy Carter was because he started to counter the imperialist narrative.
Mm-hmm.
In his actions. He didn't come out and say a lot, but he did a lot that challenged the dominant narrative. So I think that's one of the reasons why they shunned him. They shunned Donald Trump because he's an idiot.
Yeah, they just don't like Trump.
Yeah,
I mean, but
like
even the Israel-Palestine thing, to make that point clear.
Right.
When he's pushing back, he's like, I spoke with Hamas. I worked with these deals behind the scenes. I couldn't necessarily do it officially, but I was doing this stuff behind the scenes. And even when he's like talking to the press, he's like, yeah, of course you can make a deal with Hamas. Israel wants one state, in which case they're blowing off all deals. They want to separate, like, he was willing to go there and even point out many of the political people aren't allowed to take a position on Israel because they'll get voted out if they do. Meaning he's exposing that stuff. He's saying that stuff openly. That's not just relevant today, but is, experientially true today in a way that we can see in an obvious manner.
He was a born again Southern Baptist that didn't follow the common trend of racist Southern Baptists.
Yeah.
So there were a number of things. He was truly led by his faith, and his faith was an inclusive faith, not an exclusive faith. And
so cool.
And so I think that also factored into that as well. He was, he wasn't part of that Jerry Falwell, Ralph Reed, those racist a-holes. He was a Christian
in real terms. Not, I go clubbing on Saturday. I, do whatever I want and then go to church. He wasn't that guy.
Right.
He was through and through. So yeah, I give the man
credit. You wouldn't have found his name on that list of
I know what you
the $17 million settlement sexual harassment settlement list.
I'm glad you bring that up. Well, I got to go to MAGA heaven first.
Right.
War in MAGA heaven, because the war in MAGA heaven thing I have been completely fascinated by. So Donald Trump, at one point when he was running in the race, said this, and just so people would know, H1B1 visas is the issue. Trump's MAGA is pointing out, well, Vivek and Elon are insinuating that white people are lazy and that they're not qualified to do various jobs. And I'm saying Americans, but often, you usually call us lazy, but in this case, this is foreigners calling white people lazy, which they don't particularly like. And they're pointing out saying, we don't have enough jobs or not enough people to get various jobs that are high-tech and skilled labor. And so we need to go out of the country and pull those people in. MAGA is saying that is outrageous. Obviously, there are 320 million people in this country. Corporations are abusing that system in order to gut costs, maybe gut labor, to knock down the amount of money that we spend to pay for labor, because those people don't make as much, and on some level, they're not treated as well as Americans. Trump, initially, when he was running, early on, said, oh, that is not the article that I wanted. It's okay. Trump, when he was running the first time around, said, if I can find that article, I had that thing queued up and then I'm pulled away from it. Give me 1 second. This.
Can't hear it.
That was MAGA himself pointing out these visas are abused. I abuse it. We shouldn't have it, but hey, I abuse it. And then you get Elon Musk coming out. Well, he elected, or Trump added to his team Shram Krishnan, in which case MAGA flipped out. And they kept pointing out, it's like, how are you calling yourself? Make America great again, meaning every American. I could play speeches by J.D. Vance, where J.D. Vance is saying, we are going to fight for every American. And then you hire somebody who most likely wants to expand the H1B1 visa program. And this goes from Elon Musk getting pretty lewd in his attacks. And you get people like Steve Bannon, who is losing his mind over this and going after Elon Musk with both barrels drawn. I'm going to play this one clip. I don't want to get your take on this issue as a whole. This is Bannon going after
capitalism and Elon Musk. And by the way, when we cut him off, he went begging the CCP, and that's why they have the joint venture in Shanghai, the Tesla, which is 100% of his value, right? This guy lives on government contracts and taxpayer subsidies. Okay, it's on that. We're going to get Joe Allen in here for a second. Elon Musk, once again, brother, I'm smart enough to tell you no to your face, and I'm evil enough to be able to expose you as a running dog for the greatest enemy this nation's ever had. You're a war profiteer. You're sleeping with the enemy, brother. and you've been doing it because you're not an American nationalist. You're not even an American. All you are is a globalist, okay? A globalist. And you will go where anybody writes you a check, and you would take it from Adolf Hitler himself, because you're taking it from people that are as bad as Adolf Hitler. The murderers.
Don't stop now. Get off.
Steve Bannon is nuts.
Don't stop now. Get down.
He is a lunatic on the issue of China. By the same token, he is right on Musk. Now, I want your take on this, because I have my take. I've given my take to the audience a few times around. How do you see this? I mean, I'm fascinated by this. MAGA is taking an anti-corporate point of view, whereas Musk and Vivek are taking a pro-corporate point of view, saying, hey, if we need to gut wages by bringing in all of these H1B1 workers, God bless. No issue with that. And I can even show a quote by Elon Musk where he told people to go F themselves in the face and back away. He will go to war on this issue. He got here through an H1B1, and he uses them religiously. I'm fascinated by this argument. It's a pro-corporate versus anti-corporate argument in the context of the Republican Party, specifically along the lines of MAGA, where they're finding out in real terms that, hey, we liked Elon Musk when he was backing Trump, but now that he, seems to be parting ways. But he's not parting ways. Trump came out for H1B1s. So yesterday, Donald Trump gave an interview. Trump supports H1B1s. I have many H1B1s on my property. He says, I've always liked H1B1s. I've always been in favor of the visa. That's why we have them. This is what Trump said. He said, referring to the H1 program, he says, I have many H1B1s on my property, and I am a believer in H1B1s. I have used them many times. It's a great program. Yeah, give me a take on this. Musk is claiming we are going to damage America if we optimize the current program or cut back. And everybody else in MAGA is saying this is outrageous. You're calling us lazy. Obviously, we can get Americans to supply those jobs. By the way, simultaneously also want to destroy the Department of Education. Just pointing it out. Give me a take on this.
Well, I think this highlights a couple of things that should be of grave concern to Americans. The first thing is the irony because the dominant narrative that you will hear is, why aren't there more black people doing X? Why aren't there more black people doing Y? Why aren't there more black people doing Z? And the standard answer is, oh, well, we just can't find enough qualified black people to do these kinds of jobs. Well, now what you're hearing is, can't find white folks, right? Can't find enough white engineers. And we can use engineer as just a generic catch-all phrase. We just can't find enough qualified white people to do these jobs. So that to me is funny. One of the things that they talk about Donald Trump, well, a couple of things. One, he has no controlling ideology. Mm-hmm. And as such, he is a transactional individual. And so it's very easy for him to be all over the map because he has no map. So they also say that the last person in his ear is the one. That's what's going to control what he then disseminates. Is whoever the last person is that he spoke to. That's the message he's going to bring. So what are we talking about here? What we're talking about is a visa program that I think the law currently says that you can't have more than 7% of these special visas going to one country. So right now, a lot of software engineers and a lot of other types of technology-related engineers are coming from the country of India. And the law says you can't have more than 7% of those visas coming from one country. So the guy that Trump, I can't remember, it begins with an S. The guy that Trump wants.
Shrinan, let me see his last name.
Him.
I mean, it's Shuram Krishnan, I believe. But
Krishnan. Right. So Krishnan says we need to raise the percentage. That's the issue. It's not do away with the program. It's not blow the program up. It's raise the percentage. And so they're arguing over an idea. They're not really arguing. So if he hasn't even given a number. All he did was tweet out, we need to raise the ceiling on this from 7% to X. So that's what's gotten everybody's shorts in a bunch, because you have industry, particularly the folks out in California, that are saying, yes, we need more of these engineers, more of these foreign engineers, because we can't find qualified Americans to do these jobs. And so then you've got the Steve Bannons of the world that are now crying foul. So, and the MAGA folks, I think they're really getting caught up in the idea. They don't even, I don't think, even really understand the reality here. So you have some that will say that the H1B1 visa, bringing those foreigners in, you're depressing wages, because they're able to get these engineers from foreign countries and pay them less than you'd have to pay. It's the same argument about Mexicans coming across the border in working in lower labor categories. It's the same argument now making its way up the food chain. While, to your other point, connecting the dots here, they want to cut the Department of Labor, Department of Education. So you're weakening education in America. At the same time, you're screaming, you're crying foul about this engineering argument. You can't, and because you don't have a president wedded to an ideology, it makes no sense.
Yes, 1,000 times yes. I made the same argument. It's like,
just one more. I'm sorry, one more quick point.
Please.
And when I say that it makes no sense, what I'm saying is, pick a lane and stay in it. Whether or not you're on the right side of the highway or on the wrong side of the highway, pick a lane and stay in it. And he can't stay in a lane because he doesn't know how to drive. He doesn't have an ideology.
1,000% agree. I said the same thing. It's like, how are you trying to defund the Department of Education while simultaneously telling Americans that you're not smart enough or we don't have enough to fill these roles? How are you doing both simultaneously? It's magical thinking. Like, it's one thing.
And you're screaming at China. You're crying foul because China is kicking your ass every way to Sunday with what? Engineers. With engineering. With people that have the latest Huawei phone, the Mate 60 Huawei phone. Forget 5G. That joint has satellite capability.
Wow.
In a cell phone.
Wow.
Forget the iPhone 16 Pro. No, this thing has satellite capability. They are kicking your hind parts every direction possible with engineering. And you want to do away with the Department of Education. It doesn't make sense.
I pointed out in my video, it's one thing if you take this argument that we believe in Americans, we believe in American workers. There may be a gap in the number of people that can fill those jobs. We don't know what that gap is. Let's say it's 10 or 20%. But we take the point of view that this system is being abused by corporations to maximize their profit. And so we want more Americans to go to school. And in doing so, we are going to make public colleges free of charge. And if you want to get a master's, God bless you. We're going to do that too, because we believe in America. We believe in Americans, and we want Americans to fill those jobs. It's one thing if I hear that. I don't hear that. I hear we need to get rid of the Department of Education. It's superfluous. And it's like, okay, dude, what are you guys talking about? And again, from a corporate point of view, I get it, right? It's like, well, yeah, we want to destroy the Department of Education. We're going to bring in more workers from outside of the country. This is going to lower wages in the same way that plantations want to bring in illegal immigrants in order to lower the wages for various jobs that we say or that they claim Americans can't do. You're right. It's the same argument that's being made. It's just being made for people making $100,000 a year as opposed to $5 an hour. It's fascinating to me. And this seems to be the fight. And they seem to be going at it like Elon Musk telling somebody to go F yourself in the face. It's pretty astonishing. But nevertheless, that's the fight. That's the argument. How do you think this is going to be resolved? I mean, Donald Trump says he likes H1B1s. He says it now, but when he was in office, apparently he was more strict on that program. One of the arguments was, look, you should optimize this program, not necessarily change it. How do you think this is going to resolve? I mean, is this going to be, because I've always said Elon Musk is not anybody's friend. He's only there for his own benefit.
Right.
And this can be the last question because we're coming to the, we've gone beyond your time and I apologize for that. How do you think this is going to ultimately turn out?
I honestly can't answer that question. And I've been asked, I get asked this question a lot about what do you think is going to happen? I can't answer the question because Donald Trump, as they once said about George W. Bush, is as dangerous as a monkey with a razor blade.
Yeah.
Because he has no, I hate to keep going back to this, but to me, this is one of the driving elements. Because he has no ideology, because he has no map, I can't tell you what trip he's going to take. Yeah. All I can tell you is he's tripping, but I can't tell you where he's going. All I can tell you is dude is flat out tripping. So I don't know because he's not wedded to anything. So Steve Bannon can get in his ear and tell him that Elon Musk is a nut and that Silicon Valley is wrong. And then he'll go, oh, and then give him a Big Mac and he'll go, oh, okay, I like that idea. And then he'll come out and tell you that the program needs to be blown up and done away with. And then Vivek Ramaswamy will get in his ear and tell him, no, H1B1 is a great program. Here are 2 Big Macs. And he'll go, oh, okay, I think that's a great idea. And then, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Not having an ideology doesn't necessarily give you this idea, right? Like if he's very transactional. There's no way to know.
No world view. So, folks, when I say no ideology, I am in this context saying he has no controlling world view. So even if that controlling worldview is wrong, it's at least a direction that we can understand and that we then can plan. That's why when Putin was asked, who do you want, Biden or Trump? He said Biden.
Yeah.
Because he said that then I have consistency. Don't like it, but I at least can plan because I know what this guy is about. Mm-hmm. You don't know what Donald Trump is about because Donald Trump doesn't know what Donald Trump is about.
Agree. I keep saying Donald Trump is a wild card.
Agree. I can give you a couple more minutes if you need.
No, you're good. I appreciate it. Okay. I had planned on keeping it to 30. We moved beyond 30. And I appreciate your time, man. Thank you for this. I really do appreciate this. We're going to get to the slush fund, which is just funny to me when they want to out all those people. I think they should do it, frankly.
Of course, it's American taxpayer dollars being used to settle sexual harassment lawsuits by members of Congress. Yes, we need to know where our tax dollars are being spent.
$17 million for sexual harassment.
For grabbing booty.
A stunt.
You're grabbing booty. I mean,
that's astonishing.
Come on. And look who it is.
In secret, by the way. Completely in secret.
Look who it is. Look who's coming out and demanding that the list be released.
Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Marjorie Taylor Greene saying enough of the booty grabbing.
Oh, you think somebody? Ain't nobody grabbing that booty, man. Have you seen the guns on Marjorie Taylor Greene? I think she would hurt somebody.
Well, just really quickly. The reason I point that out is because Scott Ritter made the point on the nuclear war issue that Marjorie Taylor Greene is somebody who can be negotiated with.
That is true.
That and so when Scott said that, there were a lot of people that wrote, "Oh my God, she's the Antichrist." How? And Scott said, "Well, I don't agree with her on all issues, but on this issue, she's on the right side of the issue."
Yeah.
And so on this, he was talking about the nuclear war issue. Now on the booty grabbing $17 million, let's expose the booty grabbers. She's on the right side of the issue. I'm no Marjorie Taylor Greene fan.
Yeah.
But the one thing about right, it's always right.
Yeah, I have no issue.
What is it's articulating it?
1000% agree. I have no issue saying that somebody is right, regardless
when
of
they're right.
The person. Yeah. As you point out, the booty grabbers should stop, and nor should our tax dollars go to settling lawsuits by people who can't keep their hands to themselves. Right. And yeah, those names should be outed.
I agree.
The man of the hour, Dr. Wilmer Leon, he is a political scientist, nationally syndicated columnist, and host of Connecting the Dots and Inside the Issues. You can follow Dr. Wilmer on Twitter at Dr. W. Leon and listen to him on his. What time do your shows air, by the way?
The reason I got to go because 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday, is on YouTube, Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon. And then Saturdays, what's the other show? Damn, I forgot the name of that show.
Inside the
Issues. Joe Biden moment. Inside the Issues. Saturdays from 11 to 12, from 11 to 2 Eastern. 11 to 2 Eastern. And Jamarl Thomas you'll hear him this Saturday on my show.
Badass, man. You have a fantastic day, man. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Same to you, brother. And
you have a good one, man.
You got
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. The man of the hour. People have been asking, where is Dr. Wilmer Leon? And I say, I'm going to get Dr. Wilmer Leon. And they scream at me when I don't get Dr. Wilmer Leon. So Dr. Wilmer Leon, there he is. I want to thank all of you for joining me this early morning, going into the new year, the great beyond, the unknown of the future. And I appreciate all of you for being with me. If you guys dig the show and you've been listening to the show and you find yourself coming back here often, please give it a like. Please share the content. I am still trying to increase the numbers. I want to get to 40,000 by the end of the year. Yes, I'm aware that there are only a few days left in the end of the year, but damn it, hope springs eternal. If Zelensky believes that the Kursk invasion is going to do something for him in real terms, well, damn it, there's no reason I can't believe that this show is going to hit 40K by the end of the year. By the way, let's go into chats. We have a little bit of time. All chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. What is this? President member for a month. Happy New Year to you and yours, and I hope the channel continues to grow. Happy to be a member of the Thomas family. Welcome to the family, President Jafar. Definitely appreciate it, man. Thank you for this. It always helps. As I point out all the time, it helps the content. It helps keeps this show ticking along. All of these shows are demonetized, by the way, meaning every morning show that is done gets almost automatically demonetized. And even when I put in to review and appeal those demonetizations, most of them come back. I'll say half and half, 50-50. In regards to the ones that are monetized versus demonetized, but they do it automatically, which means any demonetization guts whatever you make in regards to views on the show, especially a show that may not get, 100,000 views in the context of the show over the course of several days or weeks. So when I say that your support helps the show, I mean it in real terms. It effectively pays for the show. Jimmy Carter died in 2023, 2 not Mandela effect. So the Mandela effect is this idea that there's a glitch in the matrix, that when people remember something that is remembered by, let's say, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, that what you're saying here is not that these people have faulty memories, but that it's more so something has changed in the matrix, in the simulation. And so you get what Bearstein Bears, that's one. You might even get Beam Me Up Scotty. Everybody remembers Beam Me Up Scotty, even though Kurt really never said Beam Me Up Scotty. Like, there's a few of those effects that come into play that people believe that are a glitch in the matrix. I'm more inclined to believe that or Mandela died, that Mandela died in prison as opposed to Mandela becoming president of South Africa. I think those people are just idiots and just didn't know that Mandela made it to the president of South Africa and wasn't paying attention. So there's that. But in some of the other ones even caught me, the Monopoly guy with the monocle versus not having the monocle. Yeah, fascinating. I don't buy it, but fascinating nonetheless. Yeah, that's fascinating. But thank you, man. I appreciate both of you. And welcome to the family, President Jafar. All of it helps. All of it helps. Real terms. Coming up, we're going to have KJ No. He's going to be joining us to give us a rundown on what is taking place for China. What I wanted to do was bring together people who have been great friends of the show over this past year. I mean, after all, this has been somewhat of a trying year. I mean, you had a company that I worked for get fundamentally destroyed by the US government. And it is a shocking thing when the government, that is this kind of esoteric thing in the background, reaches its hand out in order to kill your job, because apparently your voice is so subversive that you are a dangerous man. You're such a dangerous man that the federal government needs to rip you off the airways because you're so dangerous. You're so subversive on the little humble channel of Radio Sputnik of 105.5 FM. That is what the federal government decided to do this year. And a lot of that had to do with the Ukraine war. The fact that they were losing the war, and they were losing what they considered to be the propaganda war in various countries across the world. Blinken even pointed out that part of the reason that people weren't jumping to support Ukraine in the war was because of RT and Sputnik, which is utter nonsense. They fundamentally misunderstand why countries behave in the way that those countries behave. If you're in South America, if you're in Africa, and you've dealt with colonization, and in many respects, South America using kill squads to knock over governments that they didn't necessarily like. Well, if you look at the Ukraine conflict, they are using Ukraine as a proxy to go after Russia. Those countries are fully familiar with this and doesn't necessarily get the propaganda that is dumped on the American or European audiences on that issue, so their point of view is different. The same thing is true, by the way, if you're talking about Africa that had to suffer through colonialization, and many of those countries fully believe that the West uses terrorism to either antagonize or disrupt governments that the West doesn't like. I have a hard time believing that that's not true, considering what they did to Syria, where you have Israel, the United States, Turkey, and some of the Gulf states putting in money, weapons, troops, and everything else in order to destroy the Syrian government. They finally accomplished it. Congratulations. If you want to call that an accomplishment, considering the Alawites that are being slaughtered, or for that matter, the Christians that are losing their homes and being killed, yes, regardless of all the triumphalism that is taking place in Western nations as they hide that fact from their populations. Thank God for Twitter. Thank God for social media, because otherwise, nobody will be seeing it. Here's another one, Mr. Ridley. Rock on, Jamal. I've been following you since the early days. Thank you, Mr. Ridley. I appreciate that, man. Try to do what I do. Just trying to do my best. And I do appreciate all of you and your attention. And by the way, I read the comments. I read the comments on the videos. I read the comments as they scroll. I don't get the opportunity to get to all of them, but I definitely read them. Whether they are good, whether they are bad, or whether they are in between. I do read. So thank you, all of you. I really do appreciate it. One of the other stories that I was going to hit while we have a little bit of time has to do with the supercut of lying media. Supercut of lying media. And what do I mean by that? So there's this idea that, and this is from Tom Elliott. So I'm going to give Tom Elliott credit for this. Ask him if I can play it. I haven't heard from him yet, but I'm going to assume this is a yes. And so I am going to play this and giving him attribution for it. Much of the media makes this argument that Twitter is a problem. Now, this is amazing considering Twitter is 50-50, meaning when they did polling or when they looked at who uses Twitter, half of the people were Democrats, half of the people were Republicans, and I would imagine many people were somewhere in between. So you get a split on Twitter as opposed to the skew in a particular direction that was taking place when Twitter was not held by Elon Musk. So regardless of what I think about Elon Musk, I do agree with him taking it over, because despite the fact that Elon Musk silences or seems to silence his critics, at the very least, he has opened the platform up to some degree and went with the Twitter files to allow people to see what the White House was doing and the government was doing in regards to trying to control the content that came out on Twitter. So there's that. They often make this argument that, disinformation is proliferating on Twitter. Disinformation is now everywhere on Twitter. Hate speech is everywhere on Twitter. Oh my God, what has Elon Musk did to Twitter? And, as some people made the point, Glenn Greenwald, one of them, mainstream media is the biggest purveyor of disinformation and nonsense than anything you would find on social media. Yes, you will find some people who are swinging for the rafters. Aliens are eating babies. That is social media, because that's just what people say, and social media is effectively just what people say. But you also get news, and you get to see that news as it's happening on the ground in real time with your own eyes, without the filter of mainstream media being associated with it. And they even have the community notes, which are damn good. Love community notes. Mainstream media has put out one nonsense story after the next, oftentimes and many of the times, flowing in line with whatever the foreign policy of the White House is. The Hunter Biden laptop, that is apparently Russian disinformation until it wasn't Russian disinformation. The ghost of Kiev, Russia blew up its own pipeline. I mean, you can go down the list of the things that they effectively came out with. Trump wants to kill and shoot Liz Cheney in the face in the firing squad. This stuff was nonsense. Trump working with the Russians. Meaning mainstream media has a habit of putting this nonsense out without ever needing to really retract the story. The most recent story by CNN, where they effectively staged a man coming out of a prison, didn't even know the man's name, got the man's name wrong, got what the guy did wrong, and couldn't tell, apparently according to them, that the video was staged. They do this constantly. And it is the reason that people distrust mainstream media in the way that it operates. It is untethered in many respects to reality. And what's sad about this, if you think of the wars, I don't think you can have any war without mainstream media backing that war. And for all intents and purposes, they back every war. Brian Williams touching himself disgustingly as missiles were fired into Syria. The light of the missiles, light my eyes, or whatever the hell he was saying. He was quoting poetry. Ken Delanian, who triumphed this idea of information warfare, because, which effectively meant the U.S. government lying to the American public in order to get in Putin's head, when in reality, the only person's head they will be getting into is the American public, because Putin doesn't care what you're putting in your media. He knows what's true or false in that situation. And yet, Ken Delanian thought it was a great thing and wrote an article saying how awesome it is that the White House is lying to the American public using bad data that they know is bad data. I'm going to play part of the super clip. I enjoyed it. I'm going to let you enjoy it also. Tom Elliott put this out, and God bless Tom Elliott for doing so. Mainstream media, and F you if you can't handle the truth. I'm going to start
cycle is that Joe Biden and reacting to applause and then walking off stage with former President Obama. It comes less than 1 week after the New York Post made a cover out of another piece of deceptively edited tape, calling him meanderer-in-chief due to what they claim was Biden walking away during a skydiving demonstration during the G7 summit last week. Biden was going over to congratulate one of the skydivers. The articles are based on cheap fakes, videos of real events that are intentionally manipulated to fool viewers.
Number 9, CNN thinks America is a democracy.
There's a lot of criticisms of Trump that he is bad for democracy, that he's bad for American democracy.
We are a republic.
We're a republic.
We are not a democracy.
Republic. We're not a democracy.
I've heard a lot of conspiracy theories. I hear a lot of things out on the road. But to hear Americans, people who would describe themselves as patriots, say that America is not a democracy, that stopped me in my tracks.
Can we stop there for a moment? Can we stop right there for a moment? This is stupid on steroids. America is a republic by definition. The idea that that guy is on CNN and doesn't know that is mind-blowing. That is mind-blowing. And he's trying to do that to make fun of Trump voters, saying, look how stupid these people are. They don't even know that we're in a democracy. Whereas this guy doesn't quite know that we are, by definition, a republic. And the first story of them hiding Joe Biden, if you remember, the way the media would take umbrage the moment that you point out the man seemed to be losing his faculties. He doesn't seem to be altogether there. He seems to be a wisp of himself. They would say, oh, that's how dare you say that about the president. And not just how dare you say that about the president. MSNBC took it to that level and said, these are cheap fakes. These are deep fakes. This is AI generated, or this is somebody in a room with Photoshop making Joe Biden look as bad as Joe Biden looks. And then you see Joe Biden at the debate and all of that shut up. And instead the media say, we didn't know that Joe Biden was this bad, despite the fact that people have been pointing out the fact that he was that bad. Robert Hur, in that report, where they were considering prosecuting Joe Biden for doing the exact same thing that they were prosecuting Donald Trump for, even in this report, he pointed out that Joe Biden was not cognitively altogether there. He was an old man with a poor memory that they didn't believe that they could prosecute because of how bad off he was. Now, they attacked her for that report until the debate, in which case everybody shut the hell up about her writing that report and accepted the fact that he was trying to give Joe Biden an out from a prosecution. From my point of view, you should prosecute it. If you're going to prosecute Trump for it, you got to prosecute Joe Biden for it. How on earth can you take this perspective that Joe Biden is sane and competent enough to be president of the United States, but is not sane and competent enough to be put on trial? So the president is a king and can do whatever he wants because he's not cognitively there enough to try in a court of law, but he is cognitively there enough to run the country. That is what they're telling us. So there's a lunacy associated with that position, but that is the position that they were taking, and Democrats were outraged that they were pointing that out. There's more to that video. I don't want to get a copyright strike because many of those videos are coming from mainstream media, and out of spite alone, they will do so. This is after my video was struck down yesterday, and it was taken down entirely. I made a video talking about YouTube being okay with child-friendly pee, and I was criticizing the fact that they were showing that stuff, and they took my video down, criticizing stuff that they already have on their channels, legally. And legally, I mean by YouTube. Just astonishing. I want to go to my guests. Wait a minute, we have another tweet, another thing. President Jafar, no one loves immigration more than rich Republicans. And of course, the reason is straightforward. Republicans are for the 1%. The 1% like to maximize their profit. And if you can bring in unskilled labor or labor that you can pay horribly, then you, by definition, maximize your profit. President Jafar, God bless, you're absolutely correct. I want to go to my guest, though. I am joined with the one and only the man of the hour coming into the new year, KJ No. He's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region. He is a contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. KJ, man, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas. Welcome to the show. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing well. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you too.
Thanks, man. So I saw a few things coming out of China recently that makes me very jealous. One was a 6th generation jet that apparently can fly into space, which is just astonishing by itself, right? The other one was a warship that was apparently the most sophisticated warship in the Chinese arsenal that just went out to land. I think it looked like an aircraft carrier, but it wasn't an aircraft carrier. It was some kind of amphibious assault ship, but the thing was magnificent in regards to a war setting. And I even saw this high-speed train that goes 450 kilometers an hour. And I stuck to myself, we are $36 trillion in debt. Why don't we have those things? Which made me a bit jealous and a bit angry at my government for not investing in those things, as opposed to wasting $10 trillion in issues of war. Somebody in the US apparently came out and said that the reason that China is inviting an arms race by presenting the 6th generation fighter, and apparently even by definition of warship that they release, is China trying to get an arms race going, KJ? Why else would they put out the 6th generation fighter for the world to see if indeed they weren't trying to get the US into some kind of arms race? What's going on?
I think there's some signaling going on, and I think they're telling the United States, you know, we are capable of defending ourselves, so don't get any ideas. We already know that China has a significant missile defense capacity. Those are the Dongfeng that they have been developing for nearly 2 decades now, and that gives them a very powerful way of creating standoff defense capacities. And now with these new stealth fighters and possibly bombers, they're showing that they also have power projection capacities. Right now, you know, all of this stuff is very speculative. People are just going off of pictures that they have seen. There are no stats that have been released. It's all kind of speculation at this point. But what the message is that China is technologically capable of building weapons to defend itself, just as it is capable of building infrastructure to develop its own country and create public wealth. Another thing that's interesting is that many of these companies are actually public companies that do public construction. And then kind of as a side benefit, they're also capable of doing military construction and military contracting, which is very different from the United States, where you have dedicated military companies. And so I would say that this is more kind of like a spin-off or of a side effect of China's overall economic and technological development, rather than any specific direct, you know, challenge to the United States as far as an arms race is concerned.
Are you concerned that, let me give you an example from the American context. Before the Second World War, the US was somewhat of an isolationist nation, especially by standards that we have today. And when we were looking at the war, FDR had to do a lot to gin up American sentiment, to get involved in that Second World War where he would have public support to do so. Pearl Harbor was a galvanizing force in doing that. And the moment that we went into that Second World War, all of the industry, everything else ramped up. And at that point, it was hard to put the genie back into the bottle, especially when people were making so much money on issues of weapons, war, etc. Is there any concern that China will go that route? Like that in this fight of sorts for survival in regards to the pressure that the US is applying to China, trying to do to China what he did to Russia, using Taiwan as a battering ram to go after China. Taiwan is part of China, despite the fact they're dumping all the weapons in the world into Taiwan. Is China concerned, or are there concerns that that same, let's say, device that kicked in after the Second World War, where the United States went into that, okay, now we're a global policeman, or at the very least, we are looking outward of the United States and projecting military force and military power. China clearly has industry where they can do it. I mean, you have 3 times our population, and we've sold a lot of our industry off for things like services and those type of things. Is there any concern that China may go that route? Or you still believe that for all intents and purposes, China has a win-win ideology, and in the context of that win-win ideology is not looking for any notion of hegemony? Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think we have to go back and look at the historical record. China has been around for a long time, so there's a long track record that you can look at. And China does not have a history of engaging in imperialist ventures. It doesn't colonize other countries. There's a kind of natural boundary to which China conforms to inside the Asian continent. When it reaches those boundaries, it simply stops. It does not have an expansionist history. Now, people like to say, oh, what about, Taiwan? Well, Taiwan is China. They say, what about, Tibet, etc. These are all parts of China. So you can't argue that simply that because there was, internal dissent inside China itself, that this was some kind of an expansionist agenda. There was a war with Vietnam in 1979. That was the last war that China fought. And before that, there was the Korean War, and it was a participant in the Vietnam War. 1979, that war, which is probably the last, major military engagement that China had, lasted less than 4 weeks. It was a kind of a punitive attack because Vietnam had attacked Cambodia and was actually colonizing Cambodia. So the Chinese did kind of a diversionary attack. The Vietnamese had to distract or reallocate their troops back to the border near China. And then that created, kind of a balancing effect. And it didn't lead to, the complete overrunning of Cambodia. And so I would say that, at least from the historical standpoint, China does not have an expansionist militarist agenda. And then certainly, once again, you can see in its position papers and what it's doing, as well as the historical record, it simply wants to trade with other countries. And it believes that trade is a win-win proposition, and that you can actually create safety for your country by having good relations with other countries rather than trying to dominate them, which is the US and Western model. The US-Western model is very clear. It's an imperialist project, and it's something that's driven by the internal contradictions of its own economy. The economies expand, they go monopolist, they become financialized in order to maintain the system that itself exists. They have to expand. It's this constant prerogative to expand, which is both capitalist and imperialist. China is not functioning from that standpoint, and therefore it doesn't have that same imperial colonialist expansionist logic. People who assert that either don't really understand the history and the mechanics of that system, or they're deliberately spouting propaganda.
I'm curious, from your point, what are you expecting from the new year in regards to China and this kind of, let's say, the global order? It seems that various countries, especially this kind of multipolarity, is only increasing and only expanding. And that seems to be, I would say, a diminishment of Europe. I mean, the US seems to be eating Europe alive with policy, basically deindustrializing Europe, leaving the United States kind of this kind of defender of Western ideology with Europe as a vassal in this case. But in the way that China is looking out at the world as they project the world out into the next 5 years or 10 years, what are they looking at? What are they trying to accomplish just as a country itself and the way it fits within the global order? I know that's somewhat of an expansive question, but I am curious on your take. It's basically, I guess, the Chinese outlook on the world.
Well, there are no secrets here. The Chinese have, planned and mapped this out. These are public documents. They have the Global Security Initiative, the Global Civilizational Initiative, a series of global initiatives. They have to do with expanding trade, expanding win-win relations with other countries. They have, a way of building out a multilateral system where countries are equal, but that they have a duty to each other towards peace and towards mutual security. So, based on, the United Nations and as well as the Bandung principles, they're essentially saying, this is the world we envisage, a world of equals where every country fits and works together in a multilateral system based on peace and mutual win-win relations. That's what they want. What do I, expect over the next years? Certainly, there will be an increased push towards multipolarity. More and more countries will join the BRICS, the SCO, the BRI, etc. I think that Europe will continue to circle the drain, and it will continue to become worse and worse. I think we will see a complete breakdown of what is called the rules-based international order and the fraudulent narratives around democracy behind that. So, for example, already you see, they've given up on any notion that they're really fighting for democracy. You think of like Bulgaria, think about Romania, Georgia. France and South Korea now. I mean, all of them have essentially given up, any meaningful pretense that there's some kind of, democratic system. I mean, South Korea is fighting hard, still trying to maintain some measure of stability. But, the empire, as it loses its centrifugal power, is simply resorting to brute force. And we see this as a long progression. It's, this has been coming a long time, starting with Iraq. It's this kind of naked power move, this naked reversion to primitive accumulation that you see in the imperial core when it can no longer coerce its vassals in the, subtle ways that it is accustomed to. It's the resort to brute force and military power, and to the naked violation of these quote unquote rules and order that it has pretextually propagated with no foundation.
Was it always coercion though? I mean, I get the sense that at one point it was, even in the US context, a win, lesser win. I guess when the economics of the United States kind of allowed it, when Europe and everything else had been demolished by the war. I mean, or was it always coercion in some way? I'm curious. It's a weird question to ask, but from my point of view, I get the sense that our system has gotten worse and worse over time. And part of the reason why I pointed out what China was building in regards to the aircraft or the sea craft, or for that matter, for God's sake, China was talking about putting a base on the moon. And the US at one point had those ideas. I mean, the John F. Kennedy speech about freedom in space. Yes, I know that speech was talking about fighting the Soviets, fair enough. But that is an expansive speech. I mean, Kennedy pointed out we're going to the moon, and within 10 years, we were on the moon. That is pretty astonishing of a feat. And those big things are not necessarily things that we're doing anymore. Those things are things that China is in many respects are doing. I guess my question becomes, why do you think that's changed? What has been, what is the difference? Why do you think that the political system has degraded in some respects? And for that matter, the expectation of even the population, or the expectation of what this country can do, given the industrial and economic potential of the United States. From your take, why has it degraded in such a way, whereas China, not so much? They seem to be on the ascendant.
Well, there are different theories about this. I don't claim to have any special authority to, interpret what happened. One has to do with the failure or the fall or the demise, the destruction of the USSR. When that happened, some people said, well, this signaled the end of history, was the failure of communism and the USSR. And other people say it was actually a mutual failure. both systems failed. It's just one of them didn't realize it. US system was already failing as well. And we see that, it's just been a little bit slower in its, manifestation. But you understand that, the US is a capitalist society. Capitalist societies have markets. When you have neoliberal markets, which is to say that they're markets that have no restraints, what happens inside those markets is that you get massive monopolies. The companies, corporations become enormous, and then they take over entire sectors of the of the field itself. So this is, this is how capitalism trends towards monopoly. Once you have monopoly, you have what, pardon my French, inshitification. The companies that are monopolies, they gouge everything they can. They deliver fewer and fewer services, poorer and poorer goods, and they exert enormous power against any kind of control. And at the same time, they're constantly immiserating the population. And so then eventually what you have is you have a population, the vast majority who are incredibly impoverished. You have a government that is captured by corporations, and then you have corporations that funnel large amounts of money simply to the top. So you have the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musks, who have monopoly corporations in their fields. And then once you have this, then because there's no reasonable way of generating value, these corporations trend towards a financialization. So they move into the financial field. And essentially, they're looking for ways to gouge money out of people that don't have it. It's a kind of rentier economy. Michael Hudson, has spelled this out in clear detail. But so, for example, you have a company like GM, which at one point was making more money off of car loans than it was from actually, building cars. You have companies like Apple or, some of the tech companies, they're not really building meaningful technological products. Essentially, they are PR companies and law firms that sue each other. And then they have a small IT department, that sells, crappy products, that they're forcing people to upgrade constantly. Mm-hmm. We see this inshitification across the board, Microsoft, Amazon, none of these corporations are accountable. They're simply gouging and destroying the markets that they're supposed to be, quote unquote, serving or monopolizing. And then that is going to result in, on the one hand, you need the kind of continuous imperial expansion based on financialization in order to simply keep the system running. And on the other hand, you see the constant immiseration and the human suffering that is increased. So, from the 1970s, the bottom 50% have not seen an increase in their salaries since the 1970s. It's essentially salaries have flatlined since the 70s. And on the other hand, you have countless billionaires constantly being creative. And under those circumstances, then what you have is a carceral state. You understand that with that kind of neoliberalism, you have to come down really, really hard. You securitize, the state. You have a 700% increase in incarceration since the 1970s. You have the implementation of police forces that are essentially colonial occupying forces. They're, militarized forces that occupy communities. And then you have, captured legislature and captured political class that essentially is simply feeding this national security state and this corporatized, winner-takes-all system. Under that structure, you are not going to get a decent society that does anything that we expect of a normal, well-functioning state. Instead, you're going to get simply structural violence compounded by structural violence, compounded by repression and oppression and surveillance. And then that will also lead into a kind of global,
a global
Yeah.
malaise. So, and to say
Oh,
China
no,
isn't
please.
doing this, right? It's not doing this. It doesn't allow corporate monopolies. It disciplines the corporate class. It plans ahead. You know, markets, to the extent that they have large companies, these are government-controlled companies. You know, the largest financial corporations on the planet. In the US, the largest financial corporations are all private banks and private equity firms. In the US, the largest banks are essentially state-controlled. They're public goods. They're like the, you know, the water company, the electricity company. Their job is to provide a public good of financing. It's a completely different system. And we can see that one system is working. It's working for its people. That's why 90% of the people in China, according to US surveys, trust their government and believe that, you know, that the future is bright. And in the United States, we know that something is seriously wrong. You know, when 70% of the population is living hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck, and vast numbers of people who are even working full-time, you know, jobs are homeless, you know that there's something deeply and fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, agreed. You know, there was a homelessness stat that came out where homelessness increased by 18% in 2024 under Joe Biden. And the year before that, it increased, I believe, 14% or 12%, I believe, which means you're getting these market increases, these marked increases in the amount of people who are literally living on the streets in one of the richest countries on the planet. It is outrageous. It should not be accepted. I agree with you. Like, I don't think anybody in the United States, or most people that you talk to, don't believe that the government is working on the interests of those people in America. And I know some Americans think that, well, the people in China are robots. That's where they go with 90%. That's not really the case. They just believe that the government is competent in the way the government is acting, in the way that the government is not competent here. I agree with you wholeheartedly, KJ. The Baltic Sea. Let's talk about the Baltic Sea. So NATO is saying that they're now going to militarize the Baltic Sea because apparently cables have been cut. And in one sense, they're blaming China, saying that China is working in association with Russia. And in another sense, they're blaming Russia, saying that these two countries are working in tandem to destroy the property, apparently, of NATO or these European countries. Give me a take on that. Is this just, you know, a problem looking for a solution where they're looking to militarize this area anyway, and so they come up with an excuse to do so? I mean, what's the evidence that this has been cut? I guess will be my first question. But more to the point, give me your take on this. Is China going around cutting cables that belong to Europe in some kind of, I don't know what this is supposed to be, some kind of terrorism that China is working in tandem with Russia and committing? Give me your thoughts.
Well, you know, anything that China is doing or is alleged to have done is supposed to be bad. And there's never any proof of this, right? Nobody has given any meaningful proof. They're simply allegations. They're trying to see if they can throw something against the wall, see if something sticks. I mean, you know, Chinese garlic is supposed to be, you know, a plot to destroy America. You know, it's cultivated by slaves. And then it's designed to, you know, kill off Americans, right? Everything. Your toaster is spying on you, you know. They're listening on you with, you know, weather balloons, right? I mean, the Chinese are, if the Chinese are listening on you with weather balloons, you know, the Chinese have thousands of satellites in low Earth orbit to assert that they need to send a large, visible, non-steerable object over the United States in order to surveil the United States is like saying, you know, the National Security Agency is spying on you with a tin can and, you know, a string that's, you know, drilled into your wall. You know, it's just absurd. This is 17th century technology. The Chinese are not using 17th century technology to surveil, you know, surveil you. So in my standpoint, I think it is all absurd. I mean, I will change my mind if I see evidence, but the fact is there is no evidence. Show the evidence, okay? Until then, we can assume that this is part of a large and continuous propaganda offensive. But speaking of that area, you know, it is already highly militarized. So for them to say that they're going to militarize it, you know, this is, you know, it's like after the fact justification. It's already being militarized. It's already highly surveilled. And if nothing else, I think that, I would be worried not so much about quote unquote cables being cut. I mean, what happened to Nord Stream, right?
Right.
I think there's some questions to answer about that. So I think that this is more propaganda. It fits into the trope that, China and Russia and Iran and North Korea are, an axis of evil, of doing bad things. And, let's just throw out some absurd lies and see how many people, take them up on it. So
is China concerned about the Uyghurs? And let me explain why I asked that. When Syria was knocked over, when the government of Syria fell, many of the people who helped overthrow Syria was not Syrians, like meaning they came from other parts, extremists, terrorists, came from other parts of other countries in order to basically invade and overthrow that government, regardless of whether they thought they could do it in the beginning. They overthrew the Syrian government. The Uyghurs that were there were effectively saying, we have to overthrow this government, and now we're going back to China, and China's next. And I saw that video, and I thought to myself, I heard a speaker, I can't remember the guy, I think he was Chinese, but he was making this argument that, China had to deal with a terrorism issue, and the terrorism issue was just so happened taking place in that region. And that the moment that they tried to change those people's mind, meaning denazify the terrorists in this case, that the U.S. starts howling that they're somehow doing something to the Uyghurs, that they're committing some kind of genocide to the Uyghurs. Now, nobody has proven this at all. And this has just been something that they've been outing because people have been throwing the label that the U.S. has been literally backing a genocide in Gaza that everybody with their own eyes can see. Meaning in the China case, you have to take our word for it. In the American case, you could see it with your own eyes. You see what they're doing. You see the depravity that our tax dollars are paying for. And so when I saw the Uyghurs effectively saying, well, we're going back to China after literally overthrowing a government and killing Christians or people who didn't necessarily follow their belief, Alawites, etc., it made me think, I guess that guy was right. What is China thinking about this? I mean, I would imagine they have to be paying attention to the Syria conflict, especially considering some of their citizens are involved in overthrowing the government. Is there any concern that those terrorists are coming back to China? Give me your thoughts on this. This was one of the questions I wanted to ask, and I forgot to ask last time. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. First, there is quote unquote no genocide of the Uyghurs in China. Their population has grown sixfold, and their life expectancy has grown 250%. Those are not the numbers that you get when you have a genocide. The Uyghurs in Xinjiang were exempt from the one-child policy. How many children does Xi Jinping have? He has one child. He was held to the one-child policy like everybody else, like they held all of their leaders. There are no exceptions. And on the other hand, the Uyghurs, being an ethnic minority, were allowed to have 2, 3, sometimes more children, which is why their birth rate is twice the level of the Han majority, and why their population has grown sixfold. So these are just extraordinary mendacities. And they come out of, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, which is a deep state think tank designed to undermine China. They come out of the words of Adrian Zantz, who was then featured prominently in all the Western media, in particular the BBC. And then he, trickled down into, quote unquote, the left, the left media as well. Amy Goodman gave him, several interviews asking a question about this guy he's like a cotton mather from the 17th century. I mean, he believes that Jews and gays are going to go to hell, and that women should be kept at home and not allowed to work outside. This is the kind of extraordinary extremist view that he holds. But Amy Goodman just gives him a free pass, doesn't ask him about any of those things, and then just repeats all of his lies. And then this becomes part of the progressive discourse as well. So, they simply acted as relay stations for State Department propaganda. Nobody has been able to point to a single body in the quote unquote Xinjiang genocide, as opposed to Palestine, which you see is an ongoing atrocity, an ongoing genocide. You can see the bodies every single day, children starving, amputated, killed every single day, babies dying, and at the same time, the US has the audacity to claim that this is not a genocide, and that what's happening in Xinjiang, which is a program of development and benefit, is some kind of genocide. We're living in an insane world, a crazy upside down world. And anybody who believes these lies, you have to understand, is either shilling as a propagandist, or is completely out of their minds. That said, the Chinese have said for a very, very long time that the US has been trying to radicalize the Uyghurs in Xinjiang to create a theocratic state inside of China. Now, China is a multi-ethnic state. There are 55 ethnic minorities. All of them have equal consideration under Chinese law. They all own land. They all have additional privileges. They all have legislative representation. Even the smallest ethnic minorities. Some of these ethnic minorities, are 2,000 or 3,000 people, and still they have legislative representation at the highest, at the People's Congress. And so there's a kind of extraordinary, program of inclusion and representation that China represents. And China does not have a history of repressing its ethnic minorities. Certainly the PRC doesn't do that. How do I know that? Because I am a Korean, and Koreans are an ethnic minority in China. If you go to the Korean parts of China, you'll see that Korean culture is perfectly preserved. People live, good lives. They feel both Chinese and secure in their own cultural traditions. As opposed to anywhere else in the world. You go to Japan as a Korean, Koreans in Japan will not tell you that they're Korean. They will hide their identity, because being Korean in Japan is worse than being Black in the United States. I kid you not.
Really?
I kid you not. Yes. I kid you not. Yes.
See, I don't know the racial dynamics in these various countries, right? So I'm always fascinated to hear like a minority experience in a different country, like meaning, like you said, a Korean in Japan, or a Black person in Japan, or whatever, religious makeup that the person has in a particular country, and how that country regards that person. It's fascinating. I didn't know that it was that way, that extreme.
Let me give you one more example, Jamal. The ethnic minorities are 8% of China's population. They're 8% of China's population, and they possess 45% of China's land, territory, mostly in autonomous regions. Okay, so that is a figure that you will never find in any other country with ethnic minorities. Most countries with ethnic minorities, the ethnic minorities are marginalized and don't have anything. But China has been working on this notion of inclusion and diversity for many millennia. It's a multi-ethnic civilizational state, and it has many flaws. But one of the things that it seems to have figured out is how to create a multi-ethnic, multi-religious state without one group dominating or one group erasing the other groups. And the way that it does that is it has built a meritocratic society. For about 2,000 years, China's been meritocratic, which means to say that, you understand that everybody and every group has brilliant people, and you support them to reach the highest levels of political office and political power. And they've done this for thousands of years. So essentially, in that sense, they understand the value of each and every minority. And at the same time, they had a secular government, once again, for thousands of years that did not interfere with religion. So you had Islamists and Buddhists and Taoists, all held under this large umbrella of a secular state that was nominally Confucian. Confucianism is largely a secular religion. So, for example, let's think about the Jewish diaspora, when they first arrived in China, probably around the 7th, 8th century, they settled around the 10th century. They had a meeting with the Chinese emperor. And the Chinese emperor said to, to the Jews who were, starting to settle in China, he said, you have to make a promise to me. You have to make sure that you respect and uphold the traditions of your ancestors. If you do that, you are welcome in China. In other words, if you continue to be Jewish, you have a place in China. Okay. And same thing for Islam. And you see this again and again. This comes out of, a philosophical tradition called Mohism, Mohism. But the Mohis believe that essentially what you want is a kind of universal tolerance, a universal love that, under the sky, all people are family. This is, kind of one of the foundational beliefs in Chinese culture, which is why it was able to create a civilizational state that was multi-ethnic and multi-religious. So all of this doesn't make any sense from a Chinese historical standpoint. But remember, the Chinese said that, have been alleging that the US has been trying to peel off and weaponize small elements of the Muslims in Xinjiang and weaponize them against the Chinese state. And the West has said, oh, no, that's all, BS. The Chinese are just making that up. They're just, quote, using this terror discourse in order to oppress people gratuitously because they're racist Fs, right? And then now you see that, you have these TIP-ETIM militants who have said that we're going to go back to China and create a theocratic ethnostate inside it. We are Salafists, we are Takfiri Salafists. We're going to wipe out not only all the Han Chinese, but any Islamic tradition, which is not Salafist. So this is the threat. And we know that this has been the case because the US has done this over and over again. It did this with Afghan jihadis. Right. It did this against Russia. It did this in, the Islamic fundamentalists were weaponized all over the world, in the Middle East, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, everywhere, against radical nationalist liberation movements, against progressive socialist movements. This has been the bull.
I'm sorry, South America. South America. You're right. It's all over the world. Ukrainians, who did they use? Hardcore right-wingers, Nazis for all intents and purposes. Right. If you look at South America, they used kill squads in order to go and attack the Sandinista governments because they didn't like the Sandinistas governments, that they were to the left. It's all over the world. Syria, for God's sake, Libya, for God's sake.
Same thing, Siebel Edwards and Lawrence Wilkerson have pointed out, they've kind of spilled the beans that this was a US plan. The Chinese were not, pulling this out of their rear end. The allegations that the Chinese were making about the Uyghurs creating, terror threats on Chinese soil were real, and that they acknowledged that the US was behind them. So Siebel Edmonds, going back to the early 2000s, and Lawrence Wilkerson said, we are in Afghanistan because we want to be able to use the Uyghurs against China to create trouble for China, as we did for the Soviet Union through Afghanistan, etc. This is a clear and distinct plan. And now the US, after having stonewalled and denied and said that this is a Chinese fantasy, we see that this is actually the case. And the Uyghur fighters have said that we are going to go back to China and sow terror, and we're going to destroy, China and create our own ethno-state. So all of this validates the Chinese position. So then the next question is, are the Chinese worried about this? I would say yes and no. On the one hand, Xinjiang is pretty stable. Okay, so they've created a stable place. US is still trying to destabilize it, because one of the things that China did in order to stabilize Xinjiang was to create massive economic development, vocational training plans, economic development, etc. And by doing this, they were able, to prevent, the conditions that result in terrorism. I mean, terrorism it flourishes under the conditions of poverty and economic deprivation. And so, if everybody is happy and if society is well developed, then nobody has a reason to fall back into these extremist beliefs. By the way, China traditionally does not have a tradition of, Salafist thought. This is, Western Wahhabi Salafist Takfiri thought is very much U.S., Saudi Arabia created trend or promoted trend. China has an indigenous tradition of Islam, which goes back over 1,000 years, and originally was largely Sufi. There are 4 traditional schools of Sufism that are actually indigenous Chinese. And so Islam is actually an inherent and large part of Chinese culture itself, as much as Buddhism, as much as Taoism is. But anyway, the US wants to weaponize these ETIM radicals against China. Does it pose a direct threat? Probably not so much in the current moment, although the US is continuing to try to reduce Xinjiang's economic development. That's why they're putting out all these, allegations of slave labor. Anything that comes from Xinjiang, cotton or tomatoes or a polysilicon, we automatically assume that it is caused by slave labor. And the reason for that is to destroy all the industries in Xinjiang, of which cotton and tomatoes produce and polysilicon are important parts. And the idea is if you destroy the industry, then everybody will be unemployed and they'll resort back to, it'll be another breeding ground for discontent. Right. So this is, extraordinarily cynical because they say they're trying to prevent Uyghurs, but they're actually trying to weaponize them and create more discontent and create suffering in order to weaponize them. But I don't think Xinjiang, for the current moment, is an immediate threat because it's a long distance from Syria to Xinjiang. But what I do anticipate happening will be an escalation on attacks on the Belt and Road projects that go through Central Asia and to Africa and towards Europe. I think terroristic attacks on those will increase, as we have already seen, for example, in Balochistan in Pakistan, where Chinese engineers are routinely killed, Chinese teachers are routinely killed. Anybody working on these Belt and Road projects is just, I think a few months ago, they took a whole bunch of barbers, people cutting hair, and they killed all of them simply because they were working for the project. Why would you kill barbers? Why would you kill day laborers? Ordinary laborers. But this is the kind of terrorism that I anticipate will continue to escalate as we see, as these kind of extremist militants spread out and gain more and more purchase.
Yeah, we have, man. I mean, I can't argue with what you're saying, right? I mean, the reality of it is we did pay those terrorists. We were supporting those terrorists. We've been paying them and supporting them going all the way back to the George Bush administration, if not before. Colonel Wilkerson, when he was on the show, he pointed out before the George Bush administration, we were backing and supporting on those terrorists in that region. And if indeed we were backing the people who invaded and destroyed Syria as we know it, some of those people were Uyghurs, right? So it's not necessarily conjecture. It is just somewhat of a flat fact. KJ, always appreciate you, man. I wanted to get you in before the end of the year because, again, I've been trying to bring the friends of the show to close the year and to open the year. And I really appreciate it, man. You have a fantastic New Year's.
Thank you. You too. Always a pleasure.
Oh, by the way, Wandering Earth, before it closes, the same guy who made Dark Forest, who made Three Body, Shi Luo. I'm butchering his name. It is Sixen Lao. That's the name. One of the things that shows up in those books has to do with this long arc of history. in a way that Americans don't really think about in that way. Like the notion that you have a government that lasts for thousands of years, or that you have a continuity of government for thousands of years. And many of the things in his book deal with that, whether it's Wandering Earth, where you have a similar government that's able to stay in place, meaning political party that is able to carry out something for thousands of years. I mean, granted, it's fanciful. You're attacking boosters to Earth and moving it away to a new sun. But whatever. But the book is fantastic. Oh, at the very least, I like that particular story in the book. And even in Three Body, it's something of government going on for hundreds of years with a certain political continuity. It's something about the way he writes that book that has, God, man, it's hard to explain to American audience. But when you read it, it comes across differently in the way that they think about the world and think about political continuity. It's just fascinating. If you get the chance, read it. I would be super curious about your take on the beginning chapters of Three Body, where they're talking about the Maoist revolution and everything else. But man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you, KJ. Thank you, man. And everything you've done for the show. All of these, you have been a friend of the show going back to Radio Sputnik time, and you have continued with your continuity here. And I really appreciate you, man. Thank you for this.
My pleasure, and thank you for your fantastic work. It's such an invaluable service to everybody who's, really wanting to hear real news.
I am a humble servant of my audience. Thank you, man. KJ No, he's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He's a contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. You have a good year, KJ. I'll see you in a few, man. Have a good one. I'll see you next year. All right. We have come to the end of the show. I would like to thank all of you that have watched, all of you that have given likes, all of you that have viewed it, meaning that have watched, and all of you that have subscribed to this channel. And beyond that point, I mean, I guess I can do this tomorrow. I'm going to do a show tomorrow also. But thank you. Just flat out, unequivocal thank you. This has been a tumultuous year, to put it mildly. And for the most part, resuming the show full time, getting it back up and running again, I wasn't necessarily how sure that was going to work. People you talk to would say, oh, there are too many people on YouTube. There's no way you can really get subscribers on YouTube. All of the shadow banning and all of this and all of that. And, I think of this like I think of anything else. I have no power over that stuff. The only power I have over is what I do. And if you push in a direction hard enough, hopefully you break through either way. And so that was the way I thought about this channel. Especially when the radio station went belly up, when the government thought I was so dangerous that they had to take me off the airwaves. The audience didn't just stay, they expanded. And I appreciate all of you for it. I really do. All the support you give to the channel, whether it's like, whether it's a chat, whether it's a view, all of it. I deeply appreciate it. There are plenty of people and places where you could be, but you have just so happened to end up here. And you have my deepest appreciation for it. I'm going to say like it. I'm going to say share it. And I am going to say subscribe. Leonard Clark. Hey, Jamal. You guess KJ is very interesting. Thank you for bringing him on. Yeah, KJ is fantastic. If you're looking for anything in the Asia Pacific region, KJ is very good. Jinho Choi. Kudos, Jamal. Thank you, Jinho. I really appreciate it, man. And even the Eastern Roman Empire had continuity transition from Latin rule to Greek culture. Fair enough. Fair enough. Tobias Clark, shout out. Dan Thomas, shout out. Method, shout out. Alexander Black, shout out. Guest bought me a lot. Thank you, man. It taught me a lot. Yeah, KJ. Look, man, I would say one of the best aspects of doing this show is getting to hear guests across the political spectrum. And, on fault lines, we used to have, for God's sake, we had a guy from NATO. We had this guy who was Benjamin Netanyahu's communications guy, and you're going to disagree with all of these people, and you're going to have fights with all of these people, but all things being equal, you got different perspectives. You get to know different parts of the world that you haven't necessarily been to and you don't necessarily involved in, and you get to hear a take. And sometimes you may bring somebody on that gives you a counter take to the take that the other person. Yeah, it informs you in some way. I mean, sometimes it's difficult to get your bearings, but all things being equal, with a little bit of research, you kind of come to a certain point of view. But it's fascinating. And I learned a lot from, I guess, whether I agree with them or not. So I'm going to say, like this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel, and I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. You guys have a fantastic day. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 67. Signing off. Have a good one all.